Hey guys, tonight we step into a hall where whispers hang thicker than incense, where the clatter of armor outside reminds you that this entire kingdom teeters on the edge of war. You find yourself in a cold stone chamber of a medieval palace, the year 1212 carved into memory by scribes who scratch records on parchment even as voices rise in heated debate. Torches spit resin into the air, their smoke scratching your throat, and the smell of damp wool and candle wax seeps into your clothes. Courtiers pace in heavy robes, muttering about border raids, tax riots, and that all-too-looming possibility of armies colliding. You feel the tension crackle like dry tinder, and though no sword has yet been drawn, you already sense you probably won't survive this if it comes to open battle. That's the cruel irony. Most of the people here will never hold a blade, but their fates are being wagered across a marriage bed. So here's the deal. Tonight we're unraveling why kings sold their daughters into the arms of enemies, and how treaties were inked in tears as much as in ink. If you're ready to learn how royal blood became political currency, hit that subscribe button. It helps this channel keep breathing through the centuries. Drop your current location and the time where you are in the comments below. After all, people once wrote to Rome from Britain to announce treaties, so you can certainly send me a line from your couch. And as always, settle in, breathe deep, and let the story guide you. Marriage treaties right from the start were not the sweet romance that ballads sometimes try to paint. You trudge back in thought to the earliest examples in antiquity: Egyptian pharaohs sending daughters to Hittite courts, Byzantine emperors parceling off nieces to Bulgar chieftains, even Frankish kings dispatching young women across the Rhine with trunks of silver and relics tucked inside. The pattern is clear. When armies were expensive and unpredictable, and when siege engines couldn't be conjured overnight, the most straightforward way to stop arrows flying was to promise your daughter's hand. After all, a wedding cost far less than a war, though the bride herself might see things differently. You picture the council table, a rough plank surface, laps pinned with knives, goblets of spiced wine half drunk, while voices drone about alliances. The men around that table know the price of campaigns, the taxes that drain coffers, the fields left fallow when men march, the widows who line the churches afterward. So, when someone suggests, what if we wed the princess to the duke's heir instead, the idea suddenly glimmers like a bargain with fate. You can almost hear the collective exhale, the shuffle of boots as men imagine relief. The princess, however, is not present to cast her vote. She's upstairs, embroidering, perhaps humming a tune, completely unaware her name is being wagered like a coin on the table. The reasoning always returns to peace. If you, as a king, have a troublesome neighbor, you might gamble on a daughter's marriage to tie him into your family line. Blood, they believed, carried more weight than parchment. A treaty without kinship could be broken tomorrow. A treaty bound by flesh and children had sharper hooks. Once grandchildren began toddling through palace halls, it became far more dangerous to betray the pact, because betrayal now meant turning your sword against your own grandchildren, staining your dynasty's memory with an ugly blot. It was a deterrent, and rulers leaned on it heavily. Of course, you can't ignore the raw economic factor. Wars burned through treasure like candlelight through tallow, hiring mercenaries, outfitting knights, repairing castles after sieges. All of it drained resources that rulers often didn't have. But a dowry, though expensive in gold and land, is still cheaper than a decade of bloodshed. Imagine the conversation: shall we raise another army? No, sire. The treasury's empty. Very well then. Summon the princess, she will serve. It feels harsh, even cruel, but from their viewpoint it was the practical solution. Kings weighed daughters against ducats, and the ducats often lost. You might expect that these marriages always occurred after a crushing defeat, as the spoils demanded by a victor, but that wasn't always the case. Often, even victorious kings offered daughters as a means of cementing a triumph. If you've already humiliated your enemy, why not bind him more tightly by having him call you father-in-law? It added insult and ensured loyalty. On the flip side, a defeated king who handed over a daughter could at least salvage dignity. I may have lost the battle, but my blood still sits in your palace, reminding you of my worth. In both directions, the logic of dynastic marriage was relentless. Step back a moment and consider the cultural weight of daughters in these strategies. Sons were expected to inherit, to lead troops, to guard the dynasty. Daughters were mobile assets, portable across borders. They could be exported like fine textiles, except with far greater consequences. Your daughter wasn't simply leaving home. She was carrying with her a claim to inheritance, a symbol of legitimacy, a walking treaty that could outlast even the ink of the parchment. And everyone knew it. When a princess rode out in her bridal procession, villagers lining the roads understood they weren't cheering a happy bride. They were witnessing their taxes saved, their crops spared, perhaps even their own lives secured. The practice also reveals the terrifying fragility of medieval and early modern states. Borders were porous, rebellions common, famine always a few bad harvests away. In that context, you as king might look at your daughter and see her not as a child, but as a bridge, and you'd hope she was sturdy enough to carry the weight of thousands of lives. You feel the pressure of that calculation. It almost justifies the decision. Almost, until you imagine being the daughter herself, told on some chilly morning that she will be shipped to a land where she knows neither the language nor the customs, and her only task is to make peace between two enemies who trust each other about as much as you trust your internet connection when uploading a video. Now, let's be honest, not every marriage treaty worked. Sometimes kings shrugged and broke their word anyway, but the fact they kept repeating the strategy shows how central it was. It was institutionalized. Scribes had standard treaty formulas. We hereby unite in friendship through the marriage of our daughter to your son. The same lines echo across centuries. You imagine the dry crackle of parchment, the ceremonial sealing with wax, the flourish of signatures. The documents themselves might sit in cathedral archives, guarded like holy relics, because they were thought to carry divine weight. After all, marriage was sacrament. By fusing politics and sacrament, rulers could wrap their pragmatic moves in the cloth of holiness, which made the entire deal harder to question. There's a scene that repeats across Europe, a bishop preaching from a pulpit about how this marriage is God's will, how it brings peace to Christendom, how the princess is a chosen vessel for divine reconciliation. It's a clever bit of PR. The crowd nods along, reassured that God approves of the treaty, and if you were sitting in the pews, maybe you'd sigh in relief. Who cares if the princess is miserable? At least you won't be called to march next spring. That's the bitter trade-off, hidden beneath incense and hymns. Another angle that can't be ignored is the role of prestige. By marrying your daughter to an enemy ruler, you weren't only securing peace, you were elevating your dynasty's status. See, my daughter now sits beside the mightiest prince in Europe. We are kin now. It could be bragging rights, political leverage at home, a way of silencing critics who muttered that your reign was weak. If your daughter bore sons, those sons might one day inherit thrones beyond your own. The chessboard of dynasties was always in play, and daughters were the queens who crossed the board diagonally, striking deals no knight could reach. But we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking this was purely cold calculation. Kings were human too. Some wrestled with guilt, some hesitated before consigning daughters to such fates. Chronicles occasionally record tears shed, though whether they were for the daughter's loss or for the treasure expended on her dowry is up for debate. You wonder, when a king kissed his daughter goodbye, did he whisper comfort, or did he remind her sternly of her duty? Maybe both. Perhaps he hardened himself, knowing that sentiment could unravel political necessity. Yet for the courtiers it was business as usual. Advisors, ambassadors, even merchants all benefited from peace. They pushed hard for dynastic marriages, whispering arguments into the king's ear. Sire, if we wed her, our trade routes will reopen. If we resist, war will devastate us. Pressure came not only from enemies but from within the court itself, where factions vied for influence. Selling a daughter wasn't only about appeasing an enemy, it was about balancing domestic rivals who demanded stability. You feel the irony sharpen. The daughter is treated as an object, yet she is the linchpin of stability. Without her, the treaty collapses. With her, thousands sleep easier at night. She's simultaneously powerless and immensely powerful. That contradiction haunted every royal nursery. From the moment a girl was born, midwives whispered whether she would become a bride of peace or a pawn of politics. Her cradle might as well have been a diplomatic desk. Looking back across centuries, you can see why chroniclers rarely question this system. It was so normal, so embedded in the logic of rule, that nobody thought to rebel against it. Only much later do voices emerge condemning it as exploitation. At the time, the practice was framed as wisdom. Kings who failed to use their daughters for treaties were sometimes mocked as reckless, too romantic, or plain incompetent. Imagine the gossip. He had a perfectly good princess and he didn't use her. Foolish. It sounds absurd, but that was the mindset. You might laugh in a tired way at the parallels to modern politics. Sure, today leaders don't exactly sell their daughters, at least not literally, but they still trade in symbolic gestures, photo ops and alliances built on appearances. Back then, the princess herself was the photo op, except she had to live with the consequences for the rest of her life. And so, as you lean back into the smoky chamber of 1212 watching the king frown at his maps while his daughter hums upstairs, you realize this was the cold arithmetic of survival. Marriage treaties were political tools, sharpened like swords, polished like coins, and wielded with the steady hands of men who could not afford sentiment. The daughter became the treaty, her body the ink, her children the guarantee. That is why kings sold their daughters, and why treaties were written not only on parchment, but on flesh and blood. The king's weakening position is rarely a tale of sudden collapse. It is usually the slow creak of doors that once shut firmly against enemies now sagging on their hinges. You are standing in a drafty council chamber, where men murmur about unpaid soldiers, merchants groan over tariffs, and peasants whisper of famine. A ruler might still wear his crown, but beneath the gold his temples sweat with the knowledge that his grip is loosening. You see the cracks everywhere, border garrisons muttering about overdue wages, bishops hinting that God frowns upon the king's heavy taxes, ambitious nobles beginning to style themselves as little kings in their own counties. It is in this climate of erosion, not triumph, that the idea of selling a daughter begins to gleam like a lifeline. Think of it. War is expensive, rebellion is worse, and drought can make both seem like luxuries. A king under such strain counts every option. He could levy new taxes, but the villages are already stretched like bowstrings. He could rally his knights, but knights are loyal only so long as coin greases their palms. He could plead for papal support, but the Pope's ear is bought with promises and bribes he cannot afford. And then, like a grim solution hiding in plain sight, comes the reminder, "Sire, your daughter is of marriageable age. An alliance with the enemy could calm the waters." You can almost see the king's jaw tighten, the heavy silence in the room as he nods, knowing the suggestion cannot be ignored. The truth is, weakening kings rarely act from strength. They act from desperation. Take a ruler who has just lost half a province to a rebellion. His enemy across the river, sensing weakness, begins massing troops. The treasury is empty, the nobles are restless, the peasants are restless. What coin remains to him that still carries value? Not silver, not grain, but blood. His daughter's bloodline becomes his final currency, one that can be spent only once, but, if spent wisely, might buy time enough to rebuild. You stand there watching the arithmetic of desperation. One princess equals 10 years of peace, perhaps even survival of the dynasty. But here's the catch. Enemies smell weakness like hounds sniffing meat. When they realize the king is cornered, their demands grow sharper. They will not settle for a handshake and a promise. They will demand the daughter herself, paraded in bridal white, escorted across borders as proof of submission. Her body is both gift and hostage. And the king, though he bristles at the humiliation, tells himself it is better than the clang of swords in his fields. If you were him, you'd probably grit your teeth and do the same. War doesn't forgive pride. War topples kings who refuse bargains. You imagine sitting beside the king at night, his crown set aside, his hands rubbing his forehead as he mutters to himself. He remembers victories of youth, days when his banner rode high and lords bent the knee. Now, those same lords are restless, his coffers echo with emptiness, and every rumour of rebellion seems to sprout overnight. He thinks of his daughter not with fatherly warmth, but with grim calculation. He does not say, "She is my child," but "She is my chance." It's not love that drives him now, but fear. Fear of losing his throne, fear of watching his line wither, fear of seeing enemies carve up his kingdom like bread at a feast. And of course, the enemy knows all this. That is the sting. They play their part well, sending emissaries with honeyed words wrapped around sharp demands. "Your Majesty, we propose peace. but peace requires assurance. Let us bind ourselves with marriage. Your daughter shall wed our Lord's son. It is a union ordained by God. The envoy smiles, but you know the king hears the real message. We know you are weak. Prove your submission. The crown feels heavier that day, the chamber colder. This weakening position is not only military or financial, it is personal. Kings in decline are haunted by whispers of legitimacy. If your nobles think you cannot defend the realm, they start weighing other options. A brother, a cousin, even a distant claimant suddenly looks tempting. The daughter's marriage can therefore do double work. It calms the enemy and silences rivals at home by showcasing a new alliance. See, the king can say, I have tied myself to the strongest neighbor. My throne is secured. It is a desperate gamble, but in politics, gambles often decide whether you eat venison or exile for supper. Think about the irony. When a king is weak, he must appear strong. Yet the very act of giving away his daughter screams weakness to everyone watching. He sells her to avoid bloodshed, but in doing so, he admits he cannot win on the battlefield. It's like showing up to a duel with a bouquet instead of a blade. The people nod, grateful for peace, but in taverns and kitchens they whisper, our king has bent the knee. He paid with his own bloodline. And while peasants are practical folk, they never forget humiliation. For them, it's always a little easier to rebel against a king once they've seen him bow. Let's take a step closer to the psychological world of such a ruler. You sit with him at a feast, but he barely eats. He stares into his wine, brooding, while minstrels sing too loudly for his mood. He's calculating, always calculating. How many troops does the enemy have? How many coins remain? How many daughters are left to trade? It's like a grim ledger, each entry a human life. The courtiers chatter about hunts and tournaments, but the king hears only the thud of hooves that might belong to invaders. This is the backdrop to every sold daughter's story, a father gnawed by dread, his options narrowing like a hallway with doors closing one by one. Sometimes, this weakening was engineered by rivals. Neighbors poked and prodded, staging little raids, cutting off trade routes, waiting for the king to show strain. Once he did, they struck with the marriage demand. They knew the clock was ticking, that the king would grab at any rope to save himself. And what rope is stronger than family ties? Even if they were shackles disguised as ropes, the enemy didn't need to conquer the fortress if they could conquer the princess's bridal chamber. One can almost pity the king in these moments. He wears silk, sits on velvet, and eats from silver platters, but he is poorer than the peasant who sleeps soundly in his hayloft. For the peasant, tomorrow is bread and sweat. For the king, tomorrow might be betrayal, invasion, or deposition. That gnawing uncertainty is the real poverty of power, and so he sells his daughter, not because he wants to, but because fear is louder than love. But let's not romanticize too much. Many kings, though weakened, found ways to dress up the transaction as triumph. They boasted of the great match, how their daughter would now sit among powerful in-laws, how their dynasty would spread across borders. It was spin, pure and simple. Everyone knew the truth, that weakness had forced his hand, but the court still applauded, the chroniclers still scribbled, and the bride still packed her trunks. Politics is theatre, and the princess was the star actor who never auditioned for the role. As you lean back, picturing the weakened king in his hall, you realize how fragile the very idea of monarchy was. A throne wasn't secured by divine right alone. It was secured by constant negotiation, by fragile peace, by gambles that mortgaged daughters like castles. Weakness wasn't a phase. It was the constant shadow under the crown. And when it deepened, when it grew unbearable, there was always one desperate, glittering solution. Sell the daughter, sign the treaty, and pray that God, or at least the enemy, would grant a few more years of quiet. So when you next hear that a king gave his daughter in marriage to an enemy, remember it wasn't romance. It wasn't pageantry alone. It was the rattle of coins running out, the silence of unpaid soldiers, the whisper of nobles circling like wolves. It was weakness dressed as wisdom, desperation wrapped in lace, and it was the last refuge of a man who once commanded armies, but now could barely command the loyalty of his own court. That is the anatomy of a weakening king, and why his daughter's hand became the most precious and painful currency in the realm. The moment comes when talk turns not to armies, not to coins, but to flesh and blood. You stand in the echoing hall of a medieval palace, where the king sits heavy in his chair, fingers drumming against the wood, eyes fixed on nothing. His counselors murmur around him. Parchment crackles, wax seals gleam, but the air carries a single truth. His daughter has become the bargaining chip. She is young, perhaps still learning her letters, or perhaps just grown enough to wear jewels without looking like a child playing dress-up. Yet now she is weighed on a scale against war, famine, and rebellion, and the scale tips, inevitably, toward the cold practicality of sacrifice. Kings rarely announced such decisions with fanfare. The choice to use a daughter as currency slipped into conversation like a knife between ribs, swift, quiet, final. "Sire," says one counselor, "the duke across the border insists on security." "Sire," adds another, "our princess is of age, and the match could bring lasting peace." The king frowns, not at the words but at the inevitability beneath them. He knows what they mean. She is no longer simply his child. She is property to be transferred, a pawn on a board where bishops and knights have already failed. You watch the realization tighten his jaw, and the chamber grows colder for it. In truth, daughters were bred for this purpose in many courts. From the moment a girl was born into royalty, midwives and scribes whispered her future, not in lullabies but in treaties. She will marry into Burgundy, they speculated. She will bind Castile and Aragon. The cradle became the contract, the nursery a holding cell until the right bidder came. And when times turned dire, the father's hesitation thinned quickly. To save his throne, he could not hesitate. The princess, whether 15 or 25, became the token he must lay down. It was not always the eldest daughter. Often, the firstborn had already been promised to a distant cousin or ally in better times. The younger daughters, those overlooked in times of plenty, suddenly rose in value when the kingdom trembled. A second or third princess might be less politically valuable in theory, but desperation reshaped the market. Any royal girl could be transformed into the bridge between enemies, provided her womb was healthy enough to produce heirs. Imagine the chill of realizing you are not the favored child, yet now your obscurity makes you the more expendable. The irony is bitter. Being overlooked meant being saved until the storm came. Around the council table, the bargaining grows brutal. Advisors argue over which daughter to choose, as though they were tallying barrels of grain. The eldest? Promised already. The middle child? Perhaps too young, but time presses, and enemies will not wait. The youngest? A gamble, but desperation forces risks. You hear them weigh virtues and vices, beauty, health, fertility, the vague docility that men in embroidered sleeves so admired. Each quality is debated, dissected, turned into a commodity. The princess herself has no voice in the matter. She is upstairs, bent over embroidery, unaware that her very worth is being assessed by men who think of her less as a person and more as a strategic hinge. When the decision is made, the atmosphere shifts. There is relief, yes, a grotesque kind of relief, as though a debt has been repaid, or a burden lifted. The king exhales, mutters his consent, and suddenly the councillors straighten, their task accomplished. The burden passes upward, onto the princess herself. She has been chosen, and there is no undoing it. The ink is not yet dry, but the chains have already closed. Think of the symbolism here. A daughter represents continuity of the bloodline, a living extension of the king's own body. To sell her to the enemy is to slice off a piece of himself and deliver it to a rival, and yet he does it, not because he wants to, but because the throne demands it. The kingdom becomes a devouring mouth, and it is the princess who feeds it. The people cheer for peace, but behind the cheer is a sacrifice they cannot see. This choice also reveals how fragile kingship truly was. You imagine yourself as the monarch, robe heavy on your shoulders, crown biting into your scalp, and suddenly the glory feels hollow. You realize you control armies, yet you cannot even control your daughter's destiny. Worse, you must deliberately surrender it. Kingship becomes a paradox, supreme power paired with the ultimate helplessness. You must trade your own blood to keep your seat. In a way, you are less free than the peasant who marries his daughter to the miller's son by choice. The higher the throne, the fewer the options. The council knows it too. Some may even enjoy it. Ambitious nobles, jealous courtiers, all watch the king squirm. They whisper to each other, "See how low he stoops, selling his own child. To them it is proof of his weakness." Yet they would have done the same, and they know it. That hypocrisy drips through the chamber like spilled wine. But politics is a game of masks, and the king must wear his proudly, even as he hands over his daughter. The daughter's own awareness varies. Some princesses learned of their fates only when the match was sealed, when trunks were packed and horses saddled. Others were groomed from girlhood with constant hints. You must be graceful, for one day you will charm a foreign court. You must be obedient, for one day peace may depend on you. Either way, the moment of decision fell like a blade. No amount of preparation softened it. To be told that your father has traded you to his enemy is to realize in one dizzying instant that your body is not your own, your life not yours to live. And yet, from the king's side, the decision was framed as noble. "She will save us all," he might proclaim, voice booming across the court. "Her marriage shall bind our enemies into friendship." In truth, it was a desperate roll of dice, but kings wrapped desperation in rhetoric, cloaking necessity in the language of sacrifice. You hear the speeches, "She is chosen by God for this duty. Her destiny is to bring peace." And perhaps the people believed it, perhaps even the daughter tried to believe it, for what other comfort was there? Still, the stark truth remained. She was the bargaining chip. She was the coin thrown across the table to silence the clatter of war. The king, pressed by his weakening position, had no other choice. In that council chamber, heavy with the scent of tallow and the mutter of scribes, his decision sealed more than a treaty. It sealed his daughter's fate, bound her life to a man she had never seen, in a land she had never visited, for the sake of a peace that might not even last a decade. And you, sitting in that hall as an unseen witness, feel the chill settle in your bones. This is not romance, not fairy tale. This is survival. This is why the daughter is chosen, why she is thrust forward as the bargaining chip when the kingdom teeters, because in the grim mathematics of kingship, nothing else carries such weight, nothing else can be spent only once, and nothing else reminds the enemy so vividly of the stakes. The moment lingers, the king rises, nods to his counselors, and the scribes lean forward with quills ready. Outside, the torches sputter. Somewhere in the castle above, the princess sings to herself, not yet knowing that her father's voice has consigned her song to silence. The enemy's demands never arrive with softness. They come in polished words, yes, sealed in wax and escorted by men in fine cloaks, but beneath the surface they bite like iron. You sit in the chamber as the envoys are ushered in, their faces schooled into courtesy, their bows just deep enough to honor the crown, but not so low as to hide the arrogance in their eyes. They know the king is weak. They know his coffers run dry. They know his soldiers grumble unpaid, and because they know, they press their advantage. The letter they carry is read aloud by a clerk whose voice trembles in the silence. It is honeyed, of course. Our Lord desires only friendship, secured in the bonds of holy matrimony, but then the knife slides in. Such bonds can be sealed only by the hand of your noble daughter, wed to our prince, and with her shall come lands, wealth and loyalty. You can feel the shift in the room. The courtiers murmur, the queen stiffens, the king's knuckles whiten on the arm of his chair. This is no polite suggestion. This is an ultimatum disguised as a wedding invitation. The demands are always layered. First, the daughter herself. Without her there is no deal, but then come the extras. A dowry heavy enough to bend wagons, a promise of fortresses ceded, a guarantee that the king will not aid any future rebellion against his new in-laws. Sometimes even hostages are requested, brothers, cousins, trusted knights, to live at the rival court as proof of loyalty. The daughter is not enough. The enemy wants her as the crown jewel of a larger ransom. You imagine the enemy ruler at his own council table, smiling thinly as he dictates these terms. For him, the princess is more than a bride. She is leverage, a visible token of conquest without battle. To have her seated beside him at feasts is to remind everyone, every day, that the once proud king across the border bent low enough to send his own flesh and blood. It is victory dressed in lace, triumph tucked into a bridal veil. The king listens to the list of demands, and you see the conflict on his face. Pride flares hot. How dare they strip him of his lands, his treasure, his child? But fear douses the flame quickly. His army is not ready. His people are weary. His throne already shakes beneath him. Pride cannot fill granaries or mend walls. Pride cannot silence hungry peasants or stop enemy cavalry. So he listens, jaw tight, to the humiliating terms. Among the courtiers, opinions divide. Some whisper that the demands are too harsh, that the king should refuse, take up arms, reclaim his dignity. Others argue that refusal would mean destruction, that a ruined kingdom helps no one, not even the daughter he would keep safe. Back and forth they murmur, their voices a swarm of bees, but in the end their buzzing changes nothing. The enemy has made his demands clear, and everyone knows the king has little room to maneuver. Sometimes the terms are cruelly precise. The enemy might demand the daughter be sent before the year's end, or that she arrive with no fewer than 500 attendants, all at the king's expense. They may insist that she renounce any claim to her father's throne, ensuring she cannot become a pretext for future disputes. Each line in the treaty tightens the chain. Each demand strips the king's bargaining power further. By the end, he may feel not like a monarch, but like a debtor forced to pawn his last possession. And yet, here lies the bitter brilliance. These demands, no matter how severe, can be sold as peace. The envoys speak of brotherhood, of God's blessing, of the bond of shared family. They smile as if offering salvation, not shackles. It is theatre, carefully rehearsed. Even the king must nod along, pretending gratitude while his stomach twists. For if he shows insult, the envoys will carry word back that he is ungrateful, untrustworthy, undeserving of mercy. He must play the part, even as the stage collapses beneath him. The queen, often ignored in these councils, sometimes dares to protest. Her voice, sharp with maternal fear, might cut across the room. You would give our daughter to the man who burned our villages, but her words rarely sway the outcome. Kingship is not ruled by love. The enemy knows this too, which is why their demands target the one treasure that stirs the most anguish. They want the daughter precisely because she is priceless. And the daughter? She may learn of the demands in whispers, overheard in corridors, caught in fragments as servants gossip. Imagine her heart pounding, realizing she is at the center of negotiations she never asked for. Her fate, her future, her body are being tallied like coin. Yet she cannot speak. Not here, not now. She is voiceless in the very moment when her life is most loudly debated. The king tries to salvage pride. He might haggle over dowries, over which castles are ceded, over the number of attendants permitted, small victories, scraps to preserve dignity. Sometimes he wins a concession, a lesser fortress spared, a smaller payment demand, but the core demand, the daughter, never shifts. That part is immovable. The enemy insists, unwavering, because they know it wounds deepest. Without her, there is no treaty. There is also the cruel awareness that the enemy may not even desire the marriage for its own sake. Sometimes the demand is made precisely to humiliate, to weaken the king further, to remind him of his dependency. The princess becomes both prize and punishment. She is given not to honor her, but to shame her father. This knowledge gnaws at the king, but he cannot undo it. Survival comes before pride, or even the common folk hear of these demands, carried by rumor and song. They gather in markets, murmuring that the princess will be sent away, that peace will follow. Some grieve for her, others cheer for the respite. For them, the personal cost matters little compared to the promise that fields may grow untrampled, that sons may return from war alive. They see the demands not as cruelty, but as a bargain worth making. Their perspective is cold but understandable. One life for thousands. The scribes, ever dutiful, record every clause in ink that will long outlast the people themselves. You picture them hunched over, scratching each demand into parchment. Lands, dowry, oaths, the words dry black, permanent, bind. Centuries later, those parchments might be read by scholars who marvel at the audacity of the terms, but for the people in the room, they are chains fastened in the present tense. And so the demands stand, immovable as stone. The king may rage in private, he may curse the enemy's arrogance, He may even weep in secret chambers, but in the council hall, he nods. He nods because he has no choice. The enemy's demands are not simply suggestions, they are the price of survival, and survival, bitter as it tastes, is worth more than pride, more than protest, more even than the daughter he signs away. This is the heart of the matter. The enemy's demands are never about the daughter alone. They are about domination, about turning victory into permanence, about ensuring that peace comes with humiliation. So the daughter is the keystone of the bargain, the visible proof that the king has bent, yielded, surrendered. To refuse is war, to accept is shame, and so the king chooses shame, hoping it will at least save his crown, his people and his name. You sit in that chamber as the envoys smile, their parchments spread across the table, their words as sweet as poisoned honey, and you know, as the king knows, that the daughter has already been lost. The demands have been made, and the bargain is set. What remains now is only the signing, the sealing, and the surrender. The air thickens with the dust of parchment and the droning of voices as negotiations unfold. You sit at the long oak table, elbows pressed into the grain, and feel the hum of tension around you. This is no casual dinner talk. This is the theatre of power, where each word weighs more than gold. The envoys lean forward, their fingers steepled, their eyes sharp as blades. The king's councillors shuffle wax tablets, tugging at their beards, debating terms line by line, and at the centre of it all lies one unspoken truth. The daughter is already promised. The only question is the price of her departure. First comes the matter of the dowry. The enemy presses for a sum so vast it could feed 10 villages for a year. They demand chests of silver, bolts of fine cloth and caskets of jewels. The council groans. The treasurer insists the coffers are nearly empty, but the enemy's envoy only smiles. Knowing well that desperation will stretch even the shallowest treasury, you hear the king mutter under his breath, calculating how many relics can be pawned, how many taxes can be wrung from peasants without pushing them into revolt. Then come the demands for land, a border fortress perhaps, or a stretch of fertile valley. To the enemy, it is a small thing, just a gesture. To the king, it is a wound carved into his kingdom's body. Yet he hesitates, which is worse, to give away stone walls or to risk the clash of steel. His councillors argue, voices rising, some insisting the fortress is expendable, others warning that ceding it invites further erosion. The debate grows heated, and you realize the princess's fate is not merely her own. It drags the map itself into rearrangement. The clergy step in, their tones sanctimonious. Let us not quibble over golden land, one bishop says. Marriage is a sacrament, a holy bond that unites kingdoms under God. You nearly laugh, for you see the bishop's hand twitch toward his own purse, where bribes often nestle, but his words soothe the room. To frame the treaty in divine terms gives everyone an excuse to swallow the bitter pill. If God wills the union, who are mere mortals to resist? The princess, of course, is not consulted in this theology. Amid the wrangling, the ambassadors perform their role with grace. They feign patience, sipping watered wine, offering gentle reminders that their master grows weary of waiting. Their smiles are rehearsed, their courtesy deliberate, but beneath it all, the pressure tightens. They are the messengers of a conqueror, cloaked in velvet, delivering chains with the softness of a lullaby. You cannot help but admire the performance, even as it makes your stomach turn. The queen, pale and rigid, listens but rarely speaks. When she does, her words pierce the room. What dowry can outweigh a child's freedom? The chamber stills, the king's jaw clenches, and the bishop clears his throat to drown her protest in talk of salvation and duty. She falls silent again, her fingers twisting the beads of her rosary. You sense her helplessness, her fury swallowed because she knows this stage does not belong to her. Her daughter's life is being written in ink, and she cannot seize the quill. The negotiations stretch into the night. Candles gutter, scribes yawn, courtiers whisper. Every clause is picked apart. What titles the princess will carry, what servants she may bring, what rights she retains over inheritance. These details may seem petty, but they are daggers concealed in parchment. Each side hopes to carve a future advantage into the treaty. The daughter, though silent, becomes the battlefield, her marriage bed mapped like contested land. One envoy presses for immediate consummation of the marriage, citing the need for heirs. The room shifts uncomfortably, but no one contradicts him. They all know this is the core of the bargain, a womb exchanged for a truce. No amount of lace or incense can disguise that truth. The scribes dutifully record the clause, their quills scratching as though etching her body into the document. You shiver at the thought of ink binding flesh so tightly. The king attempts resistance. He argues for smaller dowries, for the retention of at least one fortress, for gentler terms regarding heirs. His words are careful, but his desperation shows. The enemy's ambassadors listen politely, then nod as though indulging a child. They offer crumbs. A smaller sum here, a softened phrase there, enough to let the king save face, not enough to alter the core of the bargain. It is theatre again, and everyone plays their role. At intervals, servants enter with platters of bread, cups of wine, bowls of broth. The negotiators eat sparingly, too consumed by strategy to enjoy the food, yet the irony is sharp. While they argue over the lives of thousands, they chew bread baked by peasants who will never know the details of this treaty. For those peasants, all that matters is whether war burns their fields. The princess, though royal, becomes their unwitting shield. Her body buys them peace, at least for now. By dawn, the first draft of the treaty lies on the table. Seals glisten red, clauses march in neat lines, and exhaustion coats the faces of all involved. The princess has not entered the room, but her presence hovers over every word. She is the parchment, the ink, the very wax pressed into place. Without her, the document is meaningless. With her, it becomes binding. You realize that in this world, treaties are not written with quills alone, but with daughters' futures. As the final clauses are read aloud, the king slumps in his chair. His pride has been whittled down, his voice hoarse from bargaining. He knows he has given away too much, but he tells himself it was necessary. He pictures his soldiers marching home, his fields spared, his throne still intact. He convinces himself that the sacrifice of one child is outweighed by the salvation of many. Yet in his eyes, you glimpse the hollowness of that reasoning. He has bartered love for survival, and survival never tastes sweet. The ambassadors, satisfied, exchange bows with oily smiles. They know they have won. They will return to their master, bearing not only parchment, but also the satisfaction of having bent a rival king. Their triumph is written not in blood on the battlefield, but in ink across a treaty. They have conquered without raising a sword, and they know that once the princess crosses their border, the conquest will be complete. The court disperses slowly, murmuring. Some nobles mutter approval, praising the king's wisdom in avoiding war. Others mutter disdain, whispering that he has sold his blood too cheaply. Both views hold truth. In the corridors, servants carry the news in hushed tones, and before long the city knows the princess will wed the enemy prince. Bells may toll for peace, but for her, they toll like a funeral dirge. The daughter is finally summoned. She enters the chamber, curtsying, her eyes darting to her father, her mother, the envoys. She knows, before a word is spoken, what has been decided. The silence presses heavy, broken only by the bishop's solemn declaration of God's will. She bows her head, outwardly obedient, inwardly hollow. The treaty has become flesh. She is its embodiment. Her life has been lifted from her shoulders and placed on the scales of politics. Later, the scribes will polish the treaty, binding it with ribbon, storing copies in chests guarded by iron locks. Scholars, centuries later, will study its clauses, analysing the language, debating its fairness. But none of them will hear the catch in the princess's breath as she accepts her fate. None of them will see the queen's clenched jaw, the king's weary slump. None of them will taste the bitterness that lingers in the air when human life is tallied like coin. And so the negotiations end, not with swords drawn, but with pens laid aside. The daughter is chosen, the dowry agreed, the land ceded, the peace declared. The treaty stands, fragile yet binding, and the princess herself becomes the seal that holds it together. For her, the world has shifted forever. For the kingdom, war is delayed, perhaps avoided. For the enemy, victory has been achieved without lifting a blade. All of it decided at this table, in the dry scratch of quills, in the endless bargaining over a girl who never asked to be the currency of peace. The news spreads not in whispers this time, but in proclamations that ring out from cathedral steps and market squares. You stand among the crowd as the herald, clad in a cloak embroidered with the royal crest, unrolls a scroll and clears his throat. His voice carries over the cobbles. The princess is to be married to the prince of the rival realm, and by this sacred union, peace shall be secured. The words echo off the stone walls, swallowed by silence, then erupt into a wave of murmurs. Some cheer, some frown, some cross themselves in unease. For the people, it is less about romance and more about relief. If the king has yielded his daughter, perhaps the harvest will not be trampled by marching armies this year. The announcement is staged with ceremony, for appearances matter as much as the treaty itself. Church bells toll as though for a festival, though the sound carries a note of finality. Priests raise their hands in blessing, declaring the marriage God's will. The bishop speaks of peace, of unity, of the holy sacrament that binds nations together. You almost laugh at the performance, knowing full well this has less to do with divine will and more to do with drained coffers and exhausted soldiers. But to the crowd, the spectacle is convincing. A wedding framed as salvation is easier to swallow than the raw truth of political surrender. Inside the palace, preparations unfold with frantic energy. Seamstresses are called to craft bridal garments, gold-threaded gowns that glitter even in candlelight. Jewels are polished until they gleam. Trunks are packed with silks and tapestries meant as part of the dowry. The halls buzz with the sounds of hammers and the rustle of fabrics, as though wealth can disguise the reality of the bargain. The princess is dressed and redressed like a mannequin, her every move scrutinized by attendants who remind her that her body must represent not just beauty but dignity. She is to be the walking embodiment of the treaty, and appearances must not falter. The court, too, plays its part. Courtiers rehearse their smiles, nobles polish their armor for the processions, musicians practice their lutes and trumpets. The marriage is not only a union, but a performance staged for both kingdoms. Invitations are dispatched, banners unfurled, feasts planned. The irony cuts sharp. The kingdom spends more on the spectacle of this marriage than it could afford for its soldiers' pay. Yet the king insists, for grandeur cloaks weakness, and weakness must never show in public. When the official day of proclamation arrives, the entire city transforms into a theatre. Streets are swept clean, garlands of flowers hung across gates, tapestries draped from windows, children chase each other with ribbons, vendors hawk sweetmeats and ale. It looks like celebration, though beneath the cheer lies unease. The people know the princess is being sent away to an enemy, yet they cheer anyway, because peace means safety, and safety outweighs sentiment. You feel the contradiction pulse through the crowd, joy and sorrow mingling like wine and water. In the cathedral, the spectacle reaches its peak. The king and queen stand before the altar, the princess kneeling beside them. Incense thickens the air. Candles flicker, choirs chant hymns of unity. The bishop, resplendent in gold vestments, lifts his hands and declares the match a divine plan. What God has joined, no man shall break, he intones. Though everyone in the room knows treaties have broken countless times before, still, the words soothe. They wrap harsh necessity in silk and sanctity. The crowd kneels, not in protest but in prayer, and the illusion of holy approval settles over the bargain. Back in the marketplace, the proclamation is repeated for those who could not crowd into the cathedral. Heralds ride through the streets, their trumpets blaring, their voices hoarse from shouting. Peace is secured. The princess shall marry the enemy prince. The words are met with raised tankards, with claps on the back, with sighs of relief. For common folk, the details matter little. What matters is that their sons will not be marched to battlefields, at least not this season. They drink to the princess's sacrifice as though it were their own salvation. The queen's face, however, tells a different story. At the proclamation, she stands stiff, her lips pressed thin. To her, the celebration feels like betrayal. She watches as her daughter is paraded before the court, as the people cheer a union she dreads. Her maternal instinct sees not peace but loss. She knows her daughter will leave these walls, perhaps never to return, perhaps to bear children who will not even know this land as home. The queen's tears are swallowed, for queens are not permitted such weakness in public, but you sense the storm behind her eyes. The king, by contrast, wears a mask of triumph. He smiles, raises his goblet, declares his daughter the savior of the realm. He calls her a jewel, a bridge between nations, a gift to God and kingdom alike. His words are hollow, but the crowd roars approval. He knows it is theatre, he knows the truth is shame, but kings survive by masking shame with glory, and so he does, even if it cracks his heart to do so. Meanwhile, the princess listens to the proclamations as though from far away. Each word strikes her like a bell tolling for her freedom. She curtsies, she smiles, she bows her head, because that is what is required. But inside she feels the weight of chains. The people cheer her name, but none ask her will. She has become a symbol, a vessel emptied of choice and filled with duty. Her life, once her own, has been signed away in ink she never touched. Rumors begin to spread after the announcement. Some say the enemy prince is handsome, others that he is cruel. Some whisper he already has mistresses, others that he is pious. The princess hears these tales with a mixture of dread and resignation. She knows she will soon see for herself, but the uncertainty gnaws at her. Her future has been sealed, but its details remain a fog, and so she waits, caught between fear and duty, as the preparations whirl around her. Envoys are dispatched to carry the news across borders. Riders thunder along muddy roads, carrying scrolls with wax seals that gleam in the sun. In distant towns, bells toll as the news arrives. War has been averted, peace declared, a royal marriage arranged. The people there cheer as well, though their cheer is tinged with triumph rather than relief. For them, the princess is proof of their power, a prize wrested from a weakened king. They raise cups to their prince, who has gained a bride without unsheathing his sword. In the palace corridors, servants whisper about the preparations. They marvel at the gowns being stitched, the jewels being set, the endless carts of treasures ready for departure. They pity the princess, but their pity is hushed. After all, what can they do? Their own lives depend on this peace as much as hers. For them, the proclamation is not tragedy, but reprieve. They will not be forced to flee burning fields this year. They will not see their sons dragged to battle, and so, though they pity, they also thank her silently for her sacrifice. The scribes, always meticulous, copy the treaty again and again, each version rolled, sealed, stored in chests. They know the fragility of words, the ease with which parchment can burn, and so they multiply the text, sending duplicates to monasteries, to castles, to the archives of the enemy. Each copy declares the same truth. The princess is promised, the peace secured, her name becomes ink, repeated across dozens of scrolls, her body translated into clauses and signatures. As the sun sets on the day of proclamation, the city hums with song and drink. Torches flare in the squares, minstrels play ballads of peace, children chase sparks from bonfires. Yet beneath the laughter, a quieter note lingers. People know peace won this way is fragile. They know enemies can betray, treaties can crumble, wars can reignite. But for tonight, they allow themselves joy. For tonight, they cheer the princess's name as though it alone guarantees their safety. Inside the palace, the princess retreats to her chamber. The cheers from the city drift through the windows like ghosts. She presses her face against the cold stone wall and listens, wondering how many of those voices would still cheer if they were the ones being sent away. She knows the answer, most of them, and so she swallows her sorrow, as she has been taught, and steels herself for the road ahead. Thus the public announcement ends, not as a whisper in a chamber, but as a thunderclap that rolls across kingdoms. The treaty is now more than parchment. It is spectacle, faith, theatre, and rumour. It binds not only rulers, but entire peoples, who now see the princess not as a girl, but as a living guarantee. And she, silent in her chamber, knows that her life is no longer her own. The court does not remain silent once the proclamations have been made. If anything, the halls grow louder, filled with gossip and bitter exchanges. You stand at the edge of the great chamber, where nobles cluster in knots, their jeweled sleeves brushing as they lean in to whisper. Some speak approvingly of the treaty, praising the king's wisdom in saving the realm without a single arrow loosed. Others scoff, muttering that a true ruler would have marched to war rather than barter his daughter like a chest of coin. Their voices rise and fall like the hiss of a fire, sparks of resentment flickering in every corner. The queen bears herself with brittle dignity. She sits in her high-backed chair, fingers clenched around her rosary beads, eyes fixed on the floor. Each whispered comment stings her like a nettle, but she does not speak. She knows that to protest too openly is to invite ridicule. Some courtiers already call her weak for weeping over a decision that they insist is practical, yet her silence is heavy, more eloquent than words. Even the most hardened noble glances at her face and feels the unease of a conscience pricked. Among the king's advisors, tension sharpens into factions. One group, loyal to the treasurer, celebrates the savings that peace will bring. They nod eagerly, calculating how many coffers will be spared from the ruin of war. Another group, the martial lords, seethe at the humiliation. To them, a daughter's hand is a poor shield, compared to a drawn sword. They mutter about lost honor, about enemies emboldened by the king's weakness. In private, some even suggest that they would have preferred the risk of battle to the shame of surrender. The princess herself becomes the subject of constant debate. Some nobles describe her as a noble sacrifice, a living saint who offers herself for her people's safety. Others reduce her to a pawn, sneering that she is merely the price of peace. You overhear courtiers comparing her beauty, her manners, even her fertility, as though she were a broodmare at market. Their words are cruel, yet casual, spoken with the detachment of those who see her not as a person, but as a tool. Whispers swirl, too, about the king. Some accuse him of cowardice, claiming he chose to barter his child rather than defend his land with steel. Others defend him, pointing out that the coffers are bare, the soldiers restless, the peasants exhausted. They argue that survival is wisdom, even if it tastes of shame. Every banquet, every council, every stroll through the gardens becomes another rehearsal of these arguments. The court, splitting into camps that grow more venomous with each passing day. The queen's ladies-in-waiting weep in private chambers, mourning the loss of their mistress's daughter. They stitch gowns and pack trunks, their fingers trembling, as though each thread were a thread of fate binding the girl to exile. They murmur prayers, hoping God will soften the enemy prince's heart, but their prayers feel frail in the echoing halls. You sense their helplessness, women preparing another woman for a life none of them would choose, knowing their service helps seal her departure. Even the servants gossip. In the kitchens, cooks whisper as they stir their pots. Did you hear? The princess is to wed the enemy. Some shake their heads, pitying her fate. Others shrug. After all, she is royal, and royals exist for such bargains. To them, the sacrifice is distant, softened by the knowledge that her suffering means their fields and homes may be spared. Their talk, casual as it is, spreads like wildfire until even the stable boys know of the treaty. The court's mood is further poisoned by envy. Some courtiers eye the dowry with greedy longing. Gold, jewels, and lands are being stripped from the kingdom's treasury to accompany the princess, and many grumble that this wealth could have lined their own pockets instead. They resent her for taking it with her, though she has no choice in the matter. Their resentment simmers, a selfish bitterness that makes her burden heavier. Meanwhile, poets and minstrels seize the moment. They compose songs praising the princess as a dove of peace, a bridge between warring lands. Their verses are recited in the great hall, accompanied by the strumming of lutes. The king applauds, eager for propaganda that frames his decision as noble. Yet behind the applause you catch the forced smiles, the nobles who roll their eyes, the jesters who whisper satire in the shadows. Not everyone is fooled by pretty words set to melody. The princess walks through these halls like a ghost, hearing her fate debated on every side. She smiles politely, curtsies, performs her duties, but inside she feels hollow. To hear yourself described as a transaction, to hear men haggle over your worth as though you were land or livestock, is a wound that no silk gown can heal. She endures it in silence, for she has been raised to obedience, yet her silence becomes part of the spectacle, her composure praised as virtue, her heartbreak invisible to those who do not wish to see. The king, for his part, retreats more often into solitude. He knows his nobles mock him behind his back, knows his queen resents him, knows his daughter suffers, but he also knows the alternative was worse. His pride burns, but his logic whispers that survival matters more than honor. He drinks more heavily at feasts, his laughter too loud, his smiles too brittle. You sense his guilt in every gesture, though he will never confess it aloud. Court politics twist tighter around the treaty. Rival lords exploit the situation, maneuvering for influence, whispering that they alone advised wisely, that they alone know the true cost of the bargain. Favors are traded, alliances reshaped, knives sharpened in the shadows. The marriage treaty was meant to calm the kingdom, but within the palace walls, it has stirred chaos. The daughter is the ransom, but the courtiers are already gambling on what scraps of power her departure will leave behind. Even the clergy feed on the spectacle. Bishops sermonize about the princess's duty, painting her as a vessel of divine peace. They compare her to saints and martyrs, though she is neither. Their words sanctify the king's choice, shielding him from accusations of cowardice. Yet in cloisters and sacristies, some priests whisper uneasily, wondering if such sacrifice can truly be God's will. Their doubts never reach the pulpit. The court hears only the thunder of holy approval. The queen finds allies among the women of the court, but their influence is limited. They console her, they weep with her, they stitch prayers into the hems of the princess's gowns, but they cannot change the treaty, cannot stop the tide. Their resistance is relegated to gestures, a lingering embrace, a whispered blessing, a hidden relic, slipped into a trunk. They are powerless, and they know it, but their quiet rebellion lies in refusing to celebrate what others call triumph. Among the younger courtiers, the treaty sparks scandalous gossip. They joke crudely about the marriage, speculate about the prince's appetites, wager on how soon the princess will bear children. Their laughter grates against the queen's grief, but they care little. To them, it is entertainment, a diversion from their own idle lives. Their mockery reveals the rot at the heart of the court, a world so consumed by vanity and intrigue that even the suffering of a princess becomes fodder for amusement. The atmosphere grows heavy with contradictions. Outwardly, the court prepares for celebration, feasts, music, processions. Inwardly, resentment festers. Every noble, every servant, every priest has an opinion, and none of them hesitate to share it. The court becomes a hive of voices, buzzing with praise and complaint, prayer and gossip, loyalty and betrayal. You can almost feel the walls shudder with the weight of it. The princess, caught in this storm, learns to walk with her head high, even as her heart sinks. She listens, she endures, she prays in silence. Yet in private moments, when no one watches, she allows herself to weep. Her tears fall into pillows embroidered with gold thread, unnoticed by those who believe her composure unshakable. In those moments, you see the truth. Beneath the crown, beneath the silks, she is still a girl, frightened and unwilling, yet bound to duty she cannot escape. So the court reacts as courts always do, with chatter, with schemes, with hypocrisy. They praise and condemn, they weep and jest, they sanctify and scorn. The princess becomes their obsession, their symbol, their scapegoat, and through it all, she remains silent. The calm eye in a storm she never asked to endure. The daughter's perspective is the one least considered, yet it is the most essential. You walk with her now, not as a herald or scribe, but as though you stood quietly at her side, feeling the weight of every glance, every whisper. She has been told the news at last. The treaty is signed, her hand promised, her departure fixed. There was no question, no request for her consent. The decision descended upon her like a commandment, carved in stone. She did not cry in the hall where it was spoken. She bowed her head, as custom required, but later in the privacy of her chamber, her hands trembled as though she held a blade. She realizes her body, her future, her very breath have been traded in for the fragile hope of peace. Each morning, she is fitted into gowns that no longer feel like hers. Seamstresses chatter about fabrics and jewels, measuring her arms and waist, while she stares past them, her thoughts elsewhere. They laugh about how fine she will look on her wedding day, but she hears their voices as though through water. To her, the gown is no garment of joy. It is a costume, woven to disguise her as a willing participant. Every stitch feels like another knot tying her more tightly to a fate she never chose. She walks the corridors of the palace and feels the eyes upon her. Courtiers watch her with a mixture of pity and curiosity, as though she were already gone, a ghost wandering through halls she no longer owns. Some bow deeply, murmuring, "Your Highness," as if in reverence. Others smirk behind their hands, whispering about her worth in coin and castles. She knows the difference, and each look leaves a mark. You can almost hear her heartbeat quicken, though she never lets it show. Her face remains calm, because calmness has been drilled into her since childhood. At meals, she eats little. The taste of food is ash, when every bite is flavored by dread. Musicians play, nobles gossip, the king raises toasts, and she sits silently, her hands folded, her mind racing. She wonders what the enemy prince looks like, whether he is kind or cruel, whether he laughs often or broods like her father. She wonders whether he will see her as wife or hostage. She wonders whether he will despise her for being the daughter of his enemy. Each question cuts her more deeply than any blade could. In the chapel, she kneels before the altar, her prayers tangled between hope and resignation. She asks God to grant her courage, to shield her from cruelty, to give her strength to endure. Yet, in her heart, another thought whispers, "Why has God chosen me for this burden?" The priests preach that her marriage is divine will, but she struggles to see holiness in chains. The candles flicker, casting shadows that seem to mock her. She leaves the chapel feeling no lighter than when she entered. Her mother is the only one who speaks plainly. In private, the queen takes her hands, holds her close, and weeps silently. The queen tells her she is strong, that she must survive, that survival itself is sometimes victory. The daughter listens, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. They do not speak of love, because love feels dangerous. They speak of endurance. The queen slips a relic into her daughter's palm, a saint's medallion, worn smooth from years of prayer. "Keep this always," she whispers. It is a small rebellion, a secret shield. The princess finds herself haunted by memories of childhood. She recalls running in palace gardens, laughing as her nurse chased her, clutching dolls made of cloth and straw. She remembers hiding beneath banquet tables, stealing sugared almonds when no one watched. Those days feel impossibly distant, like dreams she once lived but can never reclaim. To think that the girl who once skipped through meadows is now to be paraded across borders as collateral, it feels like a betrayal of her own past. Her ladies-in-waiting try to comfort her, though their words ring hollow. They assure her the prince will be kind, that she will grow to love him, that she is making history. Some even envy her, imagining jewels and feasts, mistaking her burden for privilege. She smiles at them, because she knows they mean well. But inside she feels the distance widen. They cannot understand. They are free to marry for affection or not at all. She is not free. At night, sleep eludes her. She lies awake listening to the sounds of the castle, the guards' boots on the stone, the whisper of wind through arrow slits, the faint laughter from the kitchens. Her mind will not rest. She imagines her wedding, the moment when vows will be spoken in a tongue she barely knows. She imagines the bridal chamber, the loss of privacy, the loss of control. She imagines the children she will bear, children who will belong more to the enemy's house than to herself. These visions twist in her mind until she trembles beneath her covers. She begins to notice how people treat her differently now. Servants bow more deeply, courtiers flatter her more carefully. They treat her as though she were already elevated, already a princess of another land. But she feels diminished, not elevated. Their reverence is not for her, but for the treaty she represents. She is no longer a girl, not yet a bride, but a symbol, stripped of individuality. Their respect feels hollow. Their words a reminder that she no longer belongs to herself. Still, she steels herself. In the courtyard, when the court gathers for feasts and tournaments, she walks with head held high. She forces a smile when praised, curtsies when addressed, speaks gently when spoken to. She knows eyes are upon her, and she refuses to show despair. If she must be a symbol, she will be a graceful one. Yet in her chamber, once the door is shut, she collapses into tears, her face buried in her pillows, her dual existence, poised in public, broken in private, becomes her daily reality. Sometimes she dreams of escape. She imagines slipping through the postern gate, cloaked like a servant, vanishing into the countryside. She imagines living as a peasant girl, working in a field, marrying a man of her own choice. She imagines freedom, but she wakes to guards at her door, to seamstresses fussing with gowns, to courtiers bowing. Escape remains a fantasy, fragile as morning mist. She knows there is no path but forward. The court poets sing of her sacrifice, comparing her to saints and heroines of legend. They call her a dove of peace, a jewel of the realm, a vessel of God's will. Their verses echo through the halls, their rhymes sweet and hollow. She listens, but each word feels like a chain. They glorify her fate, but they do not share it. They make her into a myth before she has even lived her life. She wonders bitterly whether future generations will remember her as a savior or as a pawn. Letters arrive from the enemy court, filled with elaborate courtesy. The prince himself writes of anticipation, of duty, of honor. His words are polished, but she can read between the lines. He is not writing as a man to a woman, but as a ruler to a piece of land newly acquired. She studies his handwriting, trying to imagine the man behind it, but he remains a shadow. The uncertainty gnaws at her. Will he despise her? Will he use her gently or roughly? She cannot know, and that not knowing is the cruelest wound. The day of departure approaches, and she begins to feel the countdown in her bones. Each sunrise is another farewell. Each sunset another closing door. She lingers in the gardens where she once played, memorizing the smell of roses, the sound of fountain. She touches the stone walls of the castle, tracing grooves worn by centuries of hands. She presses her cheek to the cold surface, as if trying to merge with it, as if trying to leave some fragment of herself behind. These walls are her home, but soon they will belong only to memory. Her father visits her chambers once, alone, in the dead of night. He does not speak of love or sorrow. He speaks of duty. He tells her she is saving thousands, that her sacrifice will keep the kingdom whole. His voice is heavy, his words rehearsed, his eyes avoiding hers. She listens silently, knowing he has convinced himself this is true, but in her heart, she wonders whether his comfort is for her or for himself. He leaves without embracing her. She weeps long after the door closes. The princess lives these final days in a blur of preparation, prayer, and performance. Each moment is soaked with meaning. The last meal in the hall, the last ride through the courtyard, the last glimpse of her mother's face at supper. She collects these moments like jewels, hoarding them in her memory, knowing she cannot carry them in her trunks. They are hers alone, even if her future belongs to others. In her perspective, the treaty is not parchment, not ink, not seals. It is fear in her chest, weight in her steps, silence in her mouth. It is the sacrifice of selfhood for survival, the burial of a young woman beneath the title of bride. She does not rage. Rage is forbidden. She does not resist. Resistance is futile. She endures. And in enduring, she becomes the very thing her father desired. The bridge, the bond, the living promise of peace. The clergy step forward now, their voices swelling above the whispers of courtiers and the sighs of mothers. You stand in the cathedral, where the smoke of incense coils like mist around the pillars, and the booming tones of bishops fill the air with sanctity. They speak of the princess's marriage, not as a bargain, not as a treaty born of desperation, but as God's will incarnate. The people are told to see her as a vessel chosen by heaven, a peacemaker anointed from birth. It is theatre, gilded with scripture, yet its effect is powerful, for when God is said to bless something, few dare to challenge it. From the pulpit, the bishop declares the union holy, quoting scripture about unity, about two becoming one flesh, about peace blessed by divine law. He lifts his hands as though he himself were binding the kingdoms, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. The congregation kneels, murmuring prayers, convinced that this marriage is more than politics. It is providence. You almost smirk at the irony. a desperate king's treaty now dressed in robes of holiness, transformed by words into a sacred act. The daughter becomes not just a bride, but a saint in training, her sacrifice turned into sermon. Clergy across the kingdom echo the message. In parish churches, priests thunder that the princess's marriage is a sign of divine mercy. They urge villagers to give thanks, to pray for her safety, to trust in God's plan. For peasants weary of war, it is comforting to believe heaven itself intervened through this union. They care little for the details of treaties and dowries. What matters is that their sons may stay home another year, their fields may remain unburned. The pulpit gives the treaty a legitimacy no parchment could ever achieve. Behind the rhetoric, though, the clergy serve their own interests. Peace means stability, and stability fills churches with tithes. War disrupts pilgrimages, starves monasteries, scatters congregations. Priests know this, though they cloak it in holy words. Bishops know it too, their coffers swollen with offerings from grateful peasants. And the Pope, far away, sends his blessing, a seal that binds the treaty not just politically, but spiritually. In this way, the Church entwines itself into the bargain, securing its own wealth and influence. For the princess, the sermons feel like salt in a wound. She kneels in the cathedral, head bowed, listening as her sacrifice is described as a divine mission. People look at her with reverence, as though she has chosen this path, as though she embraces it with joy. Their admiration weighs heavier than their rare ever could. To be pitied might have left her some dignity. To be sanctified strips her of it entirely. She is no longer herself, but an icon, lifted up for others' prayers, her humanity dissolved in incense. The Queen chafes under the Church's framing. She watches bishops praise her daughter as God's chosen dove, and she feels rage boiling beneath her calm exterior. To her, it is hypocrisy. Men who never bore a child, who never wept in a cradle, now dare to claim divine ownership of her daughter. But she cannot speak her anger aloud, for to question the clergy is to invite accusations of heresy, so she bows her head like the others, though her knuckles whiten around her rosary. Among the courtiers, the sermons are received with a mix of relief and cynicism. Some genuinely believe the marriage is heaven's work, their consciences soothed by scripture. Others roll their eyes, whispering that bishops merely parrot the king's will. Yet even the skeptics know the value of religion in politics. To frame the treaty as divine transforms humiliation into triumph. A king who sold his daughter out of weakness now appears as a pious father, sacrificing in obedience to God's plan. The narrative shifts, and perception is power. The clergy ensure the message spreads beyond the court. They order processions through towns and villages, carrying icons of the Virgin Mary alongside images of the princess, painted hastily by court artists. In sermons, the princess is compared to Mary herself, a holy mother-to-be who will bring peace through her womb. The comparison is heavy, almost blasphemous, yet effective. Villagers weep at the symbolism, convinced their princess has become a vessel of divine peace. You see how carefully the Church wraps chains in silk. The princess begins to dread these public ceremonies. Each time she is paraded through streets, villagers kneel, pressing their hands together, calling her our savior. Children toss flowers, women cry blessings, men bow their heads in awe. She smiles faintly, waves gently, because she must, but inside, she feels hollow, trapped in a role she never auditioned for. She is not a savior, she is a prisoner, yet no one seems to notice. The robes of sanctity suffocate as tightly as iron shackles. The sermons also shape memory. Chronicles record bishops praising her as the hand of God, priests calling her the dove of peace. Generations later, readers will find these lines and believe them. They will not know the fear in her heart, the tears in her chamber. They will see only the Church's narrative, preserved in ink, like fossilized leaves. In this way, her true self vanishes, replaced by a symbol convenient to others. The king, meanwhile, embraces the clergy's endorsement. He attends services with renewed vigor, kneeling prominently, crossing himself with exaggerated solemnity. He knows that the Church's support shields him from criticism. If the bishops call his treaty holy, then who dares call it weakness? He leans into their rhetoric, repeating their phrases in his own speeches. His daughter's sacrifice becomes less about desperation and more about divine design. His shame is washed clean by holy water, though the stain remains beneath. For peasants, the message works. They attend mass, hear the sermons, and believe their princess is a chosen vessel. They pray for her safety. They light candles for her journey. They speak of her with reverence. To them she has become a figure larger than life. They forget she is a girl of flesh and blood, with fears and desires, and see her only as a holy promise. Their faith shields them from the grim truth of politics, but it isolates her further. The clergy, of course, reap the benefits. Monasteries receive donations in her name, altars are adorned with offerings for her protection. Pilgrimages multiply. The church thrives on her sacrifice as much as the kingdom does. Priests and bishops congratulate themselves, claiming they have guided the realm into peace. They cloak themselves in virtue, though they too have profited from her captivity. At times, the princess wonders if perhaps they are right. In her darkest nights, when tears soak her pillow, she tries to believe she is chosen by God. She tells herself her suffering has meaning, that her pain buys peace for thousands. The thought offers a sliver of comfort, though it fades with dawn. She longs for someone to see her not as symbol or savior, but as herself. Yet she knows that longing is futile. The queen continues her quiet rebellion. In private prayers, she does not ask God to bless the marriage. She asks him to free her daughter, to grant her strength, to preserve her humanity. She knows her prayers will not change the treaty, but they are her only weapon. She clings to them as fiercely as to the relic she slipped into her daughter's palm. It is her way of resisting the church's narrative, of refusing to let her daughter be swallowed whole by sanctity. In the end, the clergy succeed in shaping the perception of the treaty. To the people, it is no longer a bargain struck in desperation, but a holy union blessed by heaven. The princess is exalted as a saintly figure, her father as a pious ruler, the enemy prince as God's chosen partner. The truth, that it is a transaction built on weakness and necessity, is buried beneath hymns and incense. The narrative belongs not to the princess, but to those who speak for her, and their voices echo louder than her silence. And so, the religious endorsement becomes another chain. It sanctifies her captivity, cloaks her in symbols she cannot escape, and silences any dissent. The princess becomes untouchable, not because she is free, but because she has been locked within the gilded cage of holiness. To the world, she is blessed. To herself, she remains bound. The day of ceremonial exchange arrives, marked by pomp so lavish it nearly disguises the sorrow beneath. You stand in the palace courtyard where banners ripple in the wind, their colours bright against the grey sky, trumpets blare, drums thunder, and the gates swing open to reveal the grand procession that will carry the princess from her father's house to her husband's realm. Every detail has been rehearsed. The order of riders, the placement of guards, the gleam of armour, the rustle of silks. It is a performance meant for eyes both near and far, meant to proclaim to the world that this is no surrender, but a glorious union. The exchange begins with ritual words spoken by heralds. A crier steps forward, reading aloud the terms of the treaty, his voice strained but steady. He proclaims the daughter of the king to be now the bride of the enemy prince, joined by God, sanctioned by crown and cross alike. The crowd cheers dutifully, though the sound is uneven, broken by pockets of silence where grief outweighs celebration. You sense the tension, joy demanded, sorrow suppressed. The princess emerges then, veiled in layers of silk so heavy they seem more like armor than adornment. Pearls gleam in her hair, jewels sparkle at her throat, her gown stitched with golden thread. From a distance, she looks radiant, but up close you see the stiffness in her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. She walks slowly, measured, her steps echoing on the stone. Every movement is watched, every gesture scrutinized, for she is no longer simply a girl, she is the embodiment of the treaty itself. At the center of the courtyard stands a raised platform where the exchange is to take place. On one side, the king and his household, on the other, the enemy's envoys. Between them, a space marked by tapestries and torches, a symbolic line that once separated war and now binds peace. The heralds announce her name, and she steps forward to that threshold, her veil fluttering like a banner in the breeze. The silence is profound, broken only by the rustle of banners. The king approaches his daughter first. His face is solemn, his eyes shadowed. He takes her hand, not tenderly but ceremonially, lifting it as though she were an object of great value being presented. He does not whisper comfort. He recites a blessing instead, words rehearsed to sound noble. To him, this moment must be endured, not softened. You wonder if his heart aches beneath the mask, but the mask never slips. He places her hand into that of the enemy's envoy, and with that gesture, she passes from his custody into theirs. The queen's turn follows. She clutches her daughter tightly, breaking the ritual for a brief moment of raw humanity. Tears stain her cheeks, and her whispers, though inaudible, are urgent. Perhaps she tells her to endure. Perhaps she tells her she is love. The attendants pry them apart gently, for the ritual cannot be broken too long. The queen sinks back, pale and trembling, while her daughter is guided forward into the arms of strangers. The envoys receive her with exaggerated courtesy. They bow deeply, pressing their hands to their hearts, declaring their prince's joy and gratitude. Their words are polished, yet their eyes gleam with triumph. They have won without battle, and the princess is the prize. She is escorted onto their side of the platform, where attendants in foreign colours adjust her gown, arrange her veil, and present her as though she already belonged to their master. The symbolism is stark. She has crossed the invisible line, and there is no return. Gifts are exchanged in ritual sequence. The king offers caskets of gold, tapestries, relics of saints. The envoys present tokens of their prince, jewels, horses, falcons. The crowd murmurs at the display, dazzled by the wealth, distracted momentarily from the truth. It is theatre again, wealth piled high to mask the fact that the exchange is not equal. The princess herself is the greatest gift, though none dare speak it aloud. Priests step forward, blessing the union with chants and incense. Latin prayers rise into the air, their cadence heavy, their smoke stinging your eyes. The bishop lifts a silver cross, declaring that this moment binds not only kingdoms but souls. The crowd crosses themselves, reassured by ritual. To them, the prayers sanctify the act, turning what might like surrender into holy destiny. You feel the weight of religion pressing down, smothering doubt with incense. When the formalities end, the princess is lifted into a carriage draped in the colours of her new house. The horses stamp impatiently, their bridles glittering with jewels. Guards form up around her, their armour polished to a mirror shine. Trumpets blare once more, and the procession begins its slow roll toward the gates. Behind her, the king and queen stand on the dais, waving stiffly, their faces masks of dignity. Before her, the open road stretches into uncertainty. The people watch in silence now, their cheers fading. Some weep quietly, some bow their heads, others simply stare. For them, the ritual is both wondrous and unsettling. They have seen their princess transformed before their eyes, no longer theirs but another's. The pageantry dazzles, but the sorrow lingers. Mothers clutch their children tighter, imagining their own daughters taken so far away. Fathers mutter prayers for peace, hoping the sacrifice will hold. The procession passes through city streets lined with banners and flowers. Children scatter petals before the carriage. Musicians play triumphal tunes. Bells peal from towers. It looks like celebration, but the princess inside the carriage feels only the weight of eyes. She sits rigid, her veil drawn, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She is the centerpiece of the spectacle, yet she feels invisible. The cheers wash over her, not for who she is, but for what she represents. At the gates of the city, the ritual reaches its conclusion. The king's banners fall back, the enemy's banners take their place. Guards of one kingdom hand her over to guards of another. The moment is symbolic, final, irreversible. She crosses the threshold of the gate, and in that instant, she ceases to be her father's daughter. She becomes the bride of another realm, claimed by those who once were enemies. The gates close behind her with a clang that echoes like a coffin lid. The king turns back toward the palace, his steps heavy, his shoulders bowed beneath the weight of silence. He has played his role, delivered his daughter, secured his treaty. To the crowd, He appears resolute. To himself, perhaps, he feels hollow. The Queen lingers at the gate, staring after the carriage until it disappears from sight. She whispers prayers under her breath, her lips trembling, before allowing herself to be led away. In the city, the pageantry slowly dissolves. Banners are taken down, flowers trampled, musicians pack their instruments. The people return to their homes, murmuring about the spectacle, about the wealth displayed, about the hope of peace. For them, the day will become a story told to children, the day the princess left for marriage, the day peace was won without war. For the princess, it is the day her life was taken from her hands forever. The chronicles will record the exchange in precise detail, the names of envoys, the lists of gifts, the prayers spoken, the banners flown. They will describe it as triumph, as unity, as holy ceremony. But the chronicles will not record the look in the princess's eyes as she sat in the carriage, the tears in the Queen's embrace, the silence that fell like a shroud when the gates closed. Those truths vanish, hidden beneath layers of ritual, and so the ceremonial exchange ends, with trumpets and incense, banners and cheers, gifts and blessings. To the world it is a spectacle of unity, a symbol of peace. To the king, it is survival. To the Queen, it is grief. To the courtiers, it is politics. But to the daughter herself, it is captivity disguised as ceremony, chains hidden in lace, her freedom extinguished in the clamour of drums. The journey begins at dawn, when the air still carries the bite of night and the mist lies heavy over the fields. You stand at the city gates as the procession prepares to leave, horses stamping and harnesses jingling, the great carriage looming with its gilded panels and draped silks. Within it sits the princess, veiled and still, her face half hidden behind layers of lace. She is no longer her father's child, but the possession of another kingdom, and the road ahead is both her path and her prison. The courtiers whisper farewells, the bishop raises his hand in blessing, and with a crack of the driver's whip the wheels begin to turn. The first miles pass slowly, every hoofbeat echoing like a drum of finality. Guards ride in tight formation around the carriage, their spears gleaming, their banners flapping. Behind them trail wagons piled with dowry treasures, caskets of gold, bolts of silk, reliquaries of saints. It looks like a triumphal convoy, yet everyone knows it is also a ransom. The villagers who line the roads cheer, tossing flowers before the wheels, though their cheers sound rehearsed unsure. Some weep, bowing deeply as if sending a saint to martyrdom. Others stand silent, arms crossed, eyes wary. They know what it means to hand a daughter to the enemy, no matter the pageantry. The princess watches from within, her gaze fixed through the small slit in the carriage wall. She sees faces blur past, hands raised in blessing or clenched in silence. She hears the muffled roar of voices, but it reaches her like waves crashing on distant shores. Her heart pounds with dread, yet her body remains still, trained to composure. Every bump of the wheels jostles her like a reminder. She is leaving, and she cannot return. She presses her mother's relic to her chest, the only anchor she has left. Crossing through villages, the procession transforms into theatre for common eyes. Trumpeters ride ahead, blasting fanfares, while heralds proclaim the princess's name, her virtue, her holy mission. Priests in local parishes ring their bells, calling peasants to witness. Farmers wipe dirt from their hands, kneeling in muddy fields as the carriage rolls past. Children scamper, clutching flowers to toss at the wheels, laughing with excitement though they barely understand. It feels like a festival, though beneath the laughter lies unease. To them, the princess is both savior and sacrifice, the fragile hinge on which peace now swings. At each river crossing, the symbolism deepens. Bridges are garlanded with greenery, priests sprinkle holy water, and choirs sing as the procession passes. Yet the rivers also mark boundaries, reminders that she is being carried farther from home. Each crossing feels like a severing, each bank a farewell. She stares at the rushing water, her chest tightening, as if part of her is swept away downstream with every mile. The guards do not notice her silent grief. They keep their eyes fixed ahead, vigilant against any hint of threat. The road itself is dangerous, and everyone knows it. Bandits haunt forests, rival lords nurse grudges, Storms turn paths into quagmires. The princess's journey is not just symbolic but perilous. That is why the guard is so heavy, why the procession bristles with steel. She is not only a bride, she is collateral. If she were lost, the treaty would crumble, war would erupt. The soldiers know this, and so their vigilance is more than duty. It is survival for the entire realm. Each glance into the trees is sharp, each hand never far from a sword hilt. The people she passes whisper stories of her. In one village, they call her the Dove of Peace. In another, they mutter that she has been sold like cattle. In yet another, they simply watch silently, their eyes reflecting pity. She hears fragments of these voices through the carriage walls, and each one cuts differently. Praise feels like mockery, pity feels like chains, silence feels like abandonment. Her identity is no longer her own. It is shaped by strangers who know nothing of her heart. Nights on the road are their own ritual. The procession halts in monasteries or castles offered as lodging. Feasts are held, with local lords eager to host the travelling bride, eager to bask in the glow of her symbolic power. She sits at long tables, eating little, her smile carefully practiced, while songs are sung in her honour. She nods when praised, bows when toasted, listens when priests drone prayers. But when she retires to her chamber, alone at last, she sinks into despair. The stone walls are cold, the bed unfamiliar, the silence heavy. She whispers prayers to her relic, asking for strength, asking for mercy, asking simply to endure. Her attendants chatter to fill the silence, speaking of the lands ahead, of the prince she will meet, of the glories of her new court. They try to console her, but their words feel like blades dulled by repetition. She hears only the unspoken truth. They cannot promise kindness. They cannot promise safety. They cannot promise love. All they can promise is that the journey will end, and her fate will begin. The further she travels, the more foreign the world becomes. Dialects shift, clothing styles change, banners bear unfamiliar symbols. She realizes with each passing mile that she is not merely leaving her home, but entering another world entirely. The fields look different, the villages built of other stone, the churches echoing with strange chants. Her sense of belonging unravels. She is no longer a daughter of her own land, yet not yet embraced by the new. She drifts in limbo, suspended between past and future. At border towns, ceremonies grow more elaborate. Local priests line the roads, blessing her as she passes. Nobles kneel to offer gifts. Falcons, fine cloaks, carved chalices. These offerings are meant as honor, but to her they feel like chains, reminders that she is already being claimed by hands that are not hers. Each gift is a stone placed upon her shoulders, each bow another nail in the coffin of her old life. She accepts them with practiced grace, though inside she burns. One evening, as the procession camps by a river, she steps briefly from the carriage to breathe the night air. The guards allow it, though they hover close. She stands by the water, the moon reflected on its surface, and feels the tug of freedom for the first time in weeks. The thought of plunging into the river and letting the current carry her away flashes in her mind, but she knows she would be dragged out within moments. The guards watch too closely, and she is too valuable to be lost. So she stands silently, tears slipping down her cheeks, before climbing back into the carriage. Stories of other brides haunt her thoughts. She recalls tales of queens who found happiness, of others who found only cruelty. She does not know which fate awaits her. Her life feels like a coin flipped by men who will never bear the consequences. She clings to the hope that perhaps kindness lies ahead, though it feels fragile, a candle flickering in the wind. Her faith, her relic, her memories are all she carries. Everything else has been stripped away. The soldiers grow weary as the days stretch into weeks. Their armor dulls, their tempers fray, yet they never relax. For them the journey is less about escorting a princess than about preserving peace itself. If bandits or rebels took her, kingdoms would burn. That thought keeps them sharp. Even as exhaustion gnaws at them, they curse the endless road. But they never falter. They know the cost of failure. The princess learns to endure the monotony. She counts the days, measures the miles, marks the rivers crossed. Each sunrise is another farewell. Each sunset another step closer to a fate she cannot alter. The wheels turn, the hooves strike, the road stretches on. She becomes numb, her emotions dulled by repetition. Only in moments of solitude, when the camp quiets, when the carriage rattles in darkness, does her grief surge back, sharp and unbearable. Finally, the procession nears the border. Here the ritual will repeat. Another exchange, another ceremony, another set of vows to bind her to a land not her own. She feels the dread intensify, her stomach knotted, her heart pounding. She knows that once she crosses, she will no longer even belong in memory. She will be their bride, their hostage, their peace. The thought suffocates her, yet she sits still, veil drawn, composure unbroken. She has been trained for this, to suffer silently, to endure, and so the journey continues. Mile after mile, day after day, ritual after ritual. To the world it is a procession of peace. To the king it is survival. To the enemy it is triumph. To the people it is hope, but to the princess it is exile. Captivity wrapped in pageantry, a slow erasure of self, carried on the rattling wheels of a gilded carriage. The road finally delivers her to the enemy's gates, where towers loom against the horizon and banners snap in the wind. You stand beside the procession as trumpets blare and drums roll, welcoming the princess into the rival court's domain. The air hums with spectacle. Nobles in jeweled cloaks gather on balconies. Servants line the courtyard with torches, and the people cheer loudly, though their cheers carry curiosity more than affection. To them, she is not yet one of theirs. She is the foreign prize, the stranger who will soon become their prince's bride. The gates groan open, and the carriage rolls inside. The princess peers through the veil and sees a world both dazzling and alien. The architecture rises in strange shapes. The banners bear unfamiliar crests. The language spilling from the crowd is not the tongue of her childhood. She feels like a relic unearthed and placed in a museum, admired for her novelty rather than embraced for herself. Still, she steps out when summoned, her gown rustling, her jewels blazing. She curtsies as trained, her movements graceful despite the tremor in her hands. The prince himself stands waiting at the top of the grand staircase. He is flanked by courtiers, his posture proud, his expression carefully measured. He descends with deliberate steps, eyes fixed on her, every gesture meant to demonstrate power and poise. When he reaches her, he bows just enough to honor her rank, then offers his hand. She takes it, because she must. The crowd erupts in cheers, and the symbolism is complete. The rival prince has claimed his bride, and with her, victory without war. The court welcomes her with a feast that night, a spectacle of music, wine, and lavish displays. Tables groan beneath roasted boars, sugared fruits, spiced cakes. Minstrels sing of peace, of union, of God's blessing. Dancers twirl in silks, jugglers toss flaming torches. Laughter echoes. The princess sits beside the prince at the high table, smiling faintly when addressed, nodding when toasted. Every eye in the hall studies her, weighing her grace, her beauty, her composure. She is judged not as a woman, but as a symbol of the treaty. Her silence is praised as modesty, her stillness as dignity, her restraint as virtue. The language barrier deepens her isolation. Courtiers speak in tongues she understands only faintly. Their laughter flows around her like water she cannot drink. Attendants translate politely, but translation cannot carry tone, nuance, or hidden malice. She wonders if they mock her behind their smiles, if they measure her worth with every glance. She answers carefully, her words few, her voice soft. Better to be silent than to err, better to be mystery than to be judged unworthy. Her new attendants swarm her chamber, unpacking trunks, arranging gowns, setting jewels in caskets. They speak eagerly, pointing out customs she must learn, how to bow, how to greet, how to pray in the local fashion. Their instructions feel like lessons in captivity. She listens quietly, memorizing every rule, knowing mistakes will not be forgiven. Each ritual is a net tightening around her. She has left behind her father's court, but she has not entered freedom, only another cage, built of different stone. The prince speaks to her little in those first days. He is courteous, distant, his words polished but shallow. He asks about her journey, about her health, about her comfort, but his eyes betray calculation. He studies her as one might study a fine horse, noting her bearing, her composure, her silence. She feels his gaze but not his affection. She wonders if he sees her as wife or as political hostage or as both. She cannot know, and the not knowing gnaws at her. The people of the rival court watch her with fascination. Crowds gather when she rides through the streets, whispering about her beauty, her foreign silks, her solemn demeanor. Some admire her, others sneer. To many she is the living symbol of their victory, the proof that their prince's strength compelled a rival king to yield his daughter. Their pride feeds on her presence. They cheer not for her, but for what she represents. She smiles and waves, though each smile costs her dearly. In the cathedral of her new city, she is paraded again before altars, bishops chanting blessings, incense clouding the air. Priests declare her union holy, her presence proof of God's favor upon their realm. The sermons mirror those she heard at home, yet the words sound different here. She is not hailed as savior of her people, but as gift to theirs. To them she is not sacrifice, but triumph. She bows her head, her heart heavy, realizing how quickly holiness changes sides depending on which banner waves above the altar. Nights in her new chamber are the hardest. The walls are unfamiliar. The windows face strange streets. The air smells of spices she does not know. Servants attend her constantly, fussing with linens, adjusting candles, whispering instructions. She longs for silence, for solitude, but solitude is denied her. She lies awake, staring at the ceiling, clutching her relic to her chest. She prays not for peace of kingdoms, but for her own strength to survive. The queen mother of the rival court visits her, scrutinizing her like a jeweler examines a stone. Her words are polite but edged. She reminds the princess of her duty, her role, her responsibility. She speaks of heirs, of alliances, of obedience. There is no mention of affection, no gesture of kindness. The princess listens, nods, curtsies. She understands the warning beneath the courtesy. She is not here for herself, but for the dynasty. To fail in that role is to fail completely. The courtiers test her constantly. They watch how she greets, how she dines, how she prays. They note every misstep, every hesitation. Some offer guidance, others gossip about her behind her back. She becomes acutely aware that her every move shapes not only her own reputation, but the strength of the treaty itself. A careless word, a poorly chosen gesture, could be used as excuse for scorn, even for renewed hostility. She learns quickly, adapts swiftly, suppresses herself entirely. She becomes what they want her to be, because survival demands it. The prince's courtiers also test her loyalty. They ask about her father, about her homeland, probing for weakness. They want assurance that she will not favor her old kingdom, that she will not whisper secrets across borders. She answers cautiously, never betraying her home, never revealing too much. She learns to balance on the knife edge of divided loyalties, never leaning too far toward one side or the other. It is exhausting, but it is necessary. Rumors follow her everywhere. Some say she is proud, others that she is meek. Some claim she brings luck, others that she carries curses. Each rumor grows in the telling, until she becomes a figure of myth rather than a woman of flesh. She hears fragments of these stories and feels herself vanish within them. She is no longer herself. She is what others say she is. That too is captivity. Yet, there are small mercies. A kind maid who brushes her hair gently and whispers encouragement. A sympathetic guard who bows more deeply than required, his eyes soft with pity. A priest who, in confession, tells her she is more than a pawn, that God sees her sorrow. These moments are rare, fleeting, but they sustain her. They remind her that kindness still exists, even in a place where power overshadows love. Over time, the strangeness of her new court dulls into routine. The language grows more familiar, the customs less alien. She learns when to smile, when to bow, when to speak. She learns which courtiers to trust, which to avoid, which to placate. She becomes adept at survival, her mind sharper, her heart harder, yet beneath the composure, sorrow lingers. She has adapted, but she has not belonged. The rival court celebrates her as their own, but she knows she remains foreign. She is both inside and outside, embraced and held at arm's length, cherished and scrutinized. She walks the tightrope daily, knowing a single misstep could send her plunging. Her life has become performance, herself a mask. And though the treaty holds, though the kingdoms remain at peace, she wonders how long she can carry the weight of being both wife and hostage. Thus the arrival in the rival court marks not the end of her journey, but the beginning of a new captivity. The banners wave, the bells ring, the feasts roar, but beneath it all lies silence. Her silence, her endurance, her quiet prayer that she will survive not just as a symbol, but as herself. The treaty does not simply rest on parchment, it breathes through her presence. You watch how the court treats her not as wife alone, but as collateral, a living bond that ties two kingdoms together. Every move she makes is scrutinized, every word weighed as though peace itself trembles upon her lips. The prince's counselors remind her often, not directly but through ritual and custom, that she embodies the contract. Her obedience, her fertility, her composure are the terms of peace made flesh. She is no longer a person in the eyes of politics. She is a guarantee, a clause, a seal impressed not in wax, but in blood. The symbolism becomes routine. When ambassadors from her father's court arrive, they bow to her with particular reverence, addressing her as bridge, as bond, as pledge of friendship. Their eyes, though polite, carry a warning. Her well-being is the measure of her father's loyalty. Should he betray the treaty, she will bear the consequences first. The awareness chills her, even as she smiles for the guests. She is a hostage dressed in velvet, gilded chains clasped beneath her jewels. The prince's counselors exploit this truth openly. In councils of state, when disputes with her homeland arise, her name is invoked. Remember, sire, your wife is daughter of the king. Would he risk her safety? Her very existence becomes leverage. Letters exchanged between courts mention her health as though it were currency. The princess thrives in our care. May this remind you of your obligations. Her meals, her pregnancies, even her illnesses are reported across borders as signals of trust or warning. Her body is the barometer of peace. At ceremonies she is paraded as proof that the treaty holds. Feast days feature her prominently, seated beside her husband, crowned in foreign jewels, smiling on command. When villagers bow before her, they see not only a queen, but a symbol that the kingdoms are united. Her presence alone is propaganda, reassurance that bloodlines now mingle, that enemies now call one another kin. To the people, she is living evidence. To herself, she feels more like a statue, polished and displayed for others' comfort. Her husband, the prince, understands her role well. In public, he treats her with studied courtesy, holding her hand, addressing her fondly, praising her beauty. In private, his manner is cooler, more calculating. He knows she is valuable, but his affection is not guaranteed. Sometimes he is kind, offering small gifts or words of comfort. Other times he is distant, reminding her that her true purpose lies in bearing heirs and ensuring her father's obedience. She cannot read him fully, and that uncertainty makes her tread carefully. The Queen Mother reinforces her captivity in subtler ways. She instructs the princess on how to speak, how to smile, how to present herself at court. She reminds her that failure is not merely personal, but political. You are peace itself, she tells her, and peace must never falter. The words sound noble, but the meaning is heavy. The princess knows that if she falters, if she fails to conceive, if she speaks rashly, if she angers the court, the treaty may unravel, and she will be blamed. Even her womb becomes political. Courtiers whisper eagerly about her cycles, speculating on heirs. Physicians are summoned, midwives consulted, prayers offered. Her fertility is watched as closely as the weather, her body treated as farmland to be inspected for yield. When she conceives, bells ring across cities, declaring the treaty stronger than ever. When months pass without a child, unease spreads, as though barren seasons threaten war. She feels reduced to biology, her worth measured not by her thoughts or deeds, but by the swell of her belly. Letters from her homeland remind her of her role. Her father writes of his gratitude, praising her for securing peace, urging her to be strong. Yet, between the lines she reads another truth. He counts on her to keep the treaty intact. He does not speak of her loneliness, her fear, her sorrow. He speaks only of her duty. She realizes with bitter clarity that she is no longer his daughter, but his pledge, traded and spent. Even in letters, he treats her as an extension of his crown, not his child. Her mother's letters are different, softer, more personal. The queen writes of love, of longing, of prayer. She slips blessings into her words, reminders that her daughter is more than the treaty. These letters become the princess's lifeline, the one place where she feels seen as herself, yet they, too, carry risk. She knows her husband's counselors may read them, searching for hidden messages, for evidence of divided loyalty. She learns to treasure them in silence, hiding them like contraband, reading them by candlelight when the castle sleeps. The enemy court never lets her forget her dual role. Festivals celebrate her presence as though she were a trophy. Priests sermonize about her sacrifice, calling her the vessel of God's peace. Courtiers praise her grace. But watch for slips. Even the people in the streets, when they bow and cheer, remind her of her position. She is not one of them, but she must act as though she is. The performance is indulged, and it wears her down. She discovers that her servants are both helpers and spies. Some show kindness, smoothing her gowns, brushing her hair gently, offering small comforts. Others report her words, her moods, her tears. She learns quickly to guard her speech, to smile even when her heart aches, to weep only when alone. The knowledge that her sorrow could be used against her deepens her isolation. She begins to feel like a prisoner watched not by guards but by every pair of eyes in the palace. The treaty's weight follows her even into the chapel. Each prayer she utters is heard by priests who remind her of her duty. They bless her womb, they pray for heirs, they urge her to be obedient and steadfast. Faith, which once brought her solace, now feels like another chain. Even God seems to speak only of obligation, never of comfort. She kneels, lips moving in prayer, but her heart wonders if heaven truly listens, or if the bishops have drowned out her voice with their booming chants. When disputes flare between the two kingdoms, she feels the tension in her own body. Messengers arrive with urgent letters. Her husband grows cold, counselors whisper. At such times, her presence is sharpened into a weapon. She is paraded more frequently, her loyalty tested more openly. She feels her father's decisions reflected in her treatment. If he falters, she suffers. She becomes a pawn not only traded once, but traded continually, her body the stake in every fresh round of negotiation. The people speak of her as though she were magic. Some say her smile keeps peace alive, others that her children will blend the blood of nations into unity. Superstition grows around her, charms sold in markets, prayers written in her name. She hears of this and feels unease. To be worshipped as symbol is no less dehumanizing than to be scorned. Both erase her, both deny her the right to simply exist as herself. At times she dreams of rebellion. She imagines speaking openly, declaring herself more than collateral, demanding freedom, but she knows rebellion would doom not only herself, but thousands. War would ignite, her homeland would suffer, her people would curse her name. The burden traps her. She cannot resist without betraying those she longs to protect. So she swallows her anger, tucks it deep inside, and endures. Endurance becomes her only form of defiance. Her children, when they come, are celebrated as symbols more than as lives. Bells ring, feasts roar, treaties are proclaimed stronger than ever. She holds them in her arms, weeping silently, knowing they will never fully belong to her. They are heirs of the rival court, not hers. Raised to love a land she once feared, they are her joy, but also her deepest loss. For through them, her captivity becomes permanent, carved into the future. Thus the treaty lives through her body, her womb, her silence. It binds not only kings and lands, but her very soul. She is praised, paraded, sanctified, yet behind every jewel lies iron, behind every hymn lies silence. The treaty is not written only in ink, but in her breath, her blood, her endurance, and she knows, with aching certainty, that as long as she lives, she will remain its hostage. Yet treaties, no matter how gilded in ceremony or sanctified by bishops, often falter. You sit in the hall of the rival court years later, watching the smiles of the nobles stiffen, their whispers darken. The marriage that once shone like a beacon of peace begins to flicker. A border raid occurs, carried out by hot-headed knights loyal to her father's rival faction. Grain shipments falter. Envoys quarrel over clauses in the treaty, accusing each other of bad faith. Each incident chips away at the fragile unity, until the very union that was supposed to heal becomes the tinder of new strife. The princess feels the shift first in her husband's demeanor. Once polite, if distant, he grows sharper, colder. His words to her lose their courtesy. Where once he smiled before courtiers, now he questions her loyalty in private, asking if she corresponds secretly with her father. Each letter she receives is scrutinized, each word she writes weighed by suspicious eyes. The chamber that once felt like a gilded cage now feels like a dungeon, its walls pressing closer with each passing day. When disputes escalate, she becomes the scapegoat. Courtiers mutter that she has influenced her father's decisions, that her tears have swayed his policies, that her presence at the rival court is itself a threat. They accuse her of double loyalty, of being both wife and spy. Their whispers grow louder until even the prince's council echoes them. The very body, once hailed as the seal of peace, is now seen as a crack in the wall. Her life has become the treaty's fault line. She learns the bitterness of being blamed for forces beyond her control. When her father fails to deliver tribute on time, she is accused of conspiring. When her homeland raises troops against rebels, she is said to have whispered treachery into her father's ear. No action, no silence, no breath escapes interpretation. She exists as a mirror for other men's suspicions, their fears projected upon her. It is a role she cannot escape. The prince, caught between affection and mistrust, lashes out. Some nights he ignores her entirely, retreating into silence. Other nights he confronts her with accusations, demanding proof of loyalty. She offers none, for what proof could she give? Her love, her duty, her children should be enough, but suspicion corrodes everything. She feels herself shrinking, her voice silenced by fear. She becomes both wife and hostage, and in neither role is she safe. The court, once eager to celebrate her, now grows cold. Feasts where she once sat proudly at the prince's side become trials of endurance. Courtiers' smiles are brittle, their compliments edged with sarcasm. They speak of her as though she were already enemy, their laughter sharp as knives. She walks through halls where once she was hailed as savior, and now feels the weight of scorn. Her jewels glitter still, but they are tarnished with humiliation. The church, too, adjusts its tone. Priests once thundered about her divine mission. Now they caution her to obedience, warning that God frowns upon divided hearts. Bishops who blessed her union now scold her with sermons about loyalty. They remind her that peace rests upon her shoulders, that any fracture is her burden. Their hymns no longer comfort, but accuse. Even faith, once her refuge, now feels poisoned. Rumors begin to swirl that the treaty will fail entirely. Nobles whisper of war, of broken promises, of armies gathering. They watch her closely, as though her reaction will betray the truth. If she pales, they say she fears her father's defeat. If she smiles, they say she plots her husband's downfall. Even her silence is read as confession. She learns to master every gesture, every breath, but the effort exhausts her. She lives in a play where the script shifts daily, and she is blamed for every stumble. When war finally breaks again, it is not sudden but inevitable. The border flares with violence. Riders clash, villages burn. The treaty collapses like parchment in fire, and with it, her role as peace bride collapses too. She is no longer hailed as dove or saint. She is condemned as traitor, her very existence reinterpreted as proof of deceit. She who was once symbol of unity becomes symbol of betrayal. The shift is brutal, swift, merciless. Her children suffer as well. Once hailed as heirs of blended blood, they are now questioned, their loyalty doubted. Some whisper that they carry treachery in their veins. Others suggest they be disinherited, set aside for purer heirs. The princess watches in horror as even her children become pawns, their futures jeopardized by politics beyond their control. She clutches them tightly at night, promising protection, though she knows she cannot shield them from the tide. The prince, torn by anger and pride, begins to treat her less as wife and more as hostage. Guards at her chamber doors grow stricter. Her letters are censored, her visitors limited. She feels the prison close in, more suffocating than ever before. She wonders if she will be cast aside entirely, sent to a convent, or worse, executed as proof of loyalty to his people. The thought gnaws at her, though she hides it beneath calm composure. She remembers the day she was paraded as savior, the cheers of villagers, the incense of cathedrals. She remembers the sermons that called her chosen by God, the songs that hailed her as dove of peace. Those memories now feel cruel, mocking. They promised her meaning, but delivered only chains. She wonders if those who once praised her ever consider the irony that the dove has been caged, the saint condemned, the peace dissolved. The father writes again, but his letters are colder now. He does not speak of love, but of politics, urging her to sway her husband, to soften his court, to serve her homeland. She realizes with despair that to him, she remains a tool. Even now, he does not ask of her suffering, her fear, her children. He asks only what use she can still provide. The knowledge cuts deeper than any rumor. Among the people, her reputation splits. Some pity her, seeing her as victim of forces beyond her control. Others despise her, calling her the root of war, the curse that broke peace. Songs once sung in her honor now turn to satire, mocking her as weak, as duplicitous, as cursed. She becomes legend, not for saving kingdoms, but for failing them. History begins to turn against her even as she still breathes. In her chambers, she finds moments of bitter reflection. She asks herself if peace was ever possible, if her sacrifice ever mattered. She wonders if she was doomed from the start, pawn in a game that could never end in unity. She thinks of the girl she once was, running in gardens, dreaming of love. That girl feels like a ghost. She wonders if she has become one too. The court grows restless as war drags on. Supplies dwindle, nobles quarrel, the people suffer, and through it all, her presence remains a reminder of failure. She is peace broken, sacrifice wasted, symbol corrupted. She carries the weight of nations' anger. Though she never held a sword, never chose a side, she is condemned for the sins of kings. When treaties fail, it is always the daughters who bleed first. Some are cast aside, divorced and disgraced. Others are locked away in convents, their lives erased in cloistered silence. A few are executed, their deaths dramatized as justice. She does not yet know her fate, but she feels the shadow of all these possibilities pressing close. She prays for mercy, though mercy feels scarce in courts that feed on power. Thus the lesson becomes clear. Treaties built on daughters are fragile, for they rest not on ink or law, but on flesh and fear. When kingdoms turn, their bodies become evidence, their silence becomes guilt, their lives become expendable, and so, when peace fails, it is the daughter sold who suffers most, her sacrifice rendered meaningless, her story buried beneath the clamor of war. The long-term consequences of these dynastic unions ripple far beyond the lives of the daughters themselves. You sit now with the chroniclers, their quills scratching parchment, and you realize that every stroke of ink reshapes kingdoms. A single marriage, forged in desperation or ambition, alters bloodlines for centuries. Borders shift not by swords alone, but by cradles, by births, by claims. The princess traded as treaty becomes ancestor to rulers who will never know the sorrow in her eyes. Yet her sacrifice threads through their veins, silently steering history. The ripple touches common lives as well. Villagers who never saw a queen may find themselves marched into wars born of her lineage, fields attacked, men conscripted, markets disrupted, all because decades earlier a king gave his daughter's hand to his enemy. You sense the irony. The very act meant to avoid bloodshed sometimes plants the seeds of greater conflict. Daughters become bridges, but bridges can collapse beneath too much weight. Yet not all consequences are war. Some unions truly do strengthen realms. A well-matched marriage can bring prosperity, open trade routes, secure alliances. Merchants prosper, scholars travel, cultures blend. A princess from one land introduces new fashions, foods, even words to her adopted home. Entire cuisines shift, languages evolve, architecture flourishes because one girl was sent away in a carriage. Though her personal loss remains, her presence alters the very fabric of daily life for thousands. Dynasties, though, become tangled webs. Their bloodlines knotted until cousin marries cousin, nephew weds aunt, and genealogies collapse into confusion. You leaf through charts of kings and queens, their family trees so interwoven that half of Europe seems cousin to the other half. This too is the consequence of treaties written on daughters. They are woven again and again into the same threads, until inheritance disputes explode because everyone claims descent from the same great-grandmother. For the daughters themselves, the long-term impact is often erasure. Few chronicles preserve their names beyond the initial treaty. Once they produce heirs, their personal stories fade, replaced by the deeds of their children. Their lives are reduced to lines in genealogies, their pain compressed into phrases like, "She was given in marriage to secure peace." Centuries later, readers may marvel at the consequences of their unions, but forget the humanity that lay beneath. They become tools even in memory. And yet, some daughters leave their mark in subtler ways. Letters survive, fragments of their voices, ink that carries sorrow or defiance. A queen writes to her mother, lamenting her loneliness. Another petitions the Pope, begging for release from cruelty. These scraps remind you that behind the treaties were women who felt, who prayed, who endured. Their legacies are not only in bloodlines, but in the fragile persistence of their words. The consequences also shape gender itself. These marriages reinforce the view of daughters as currency, as vessels of policy rather than individuals. Generations of women learn that their worth lies in alliances, in wombs, in obedience. The princess sold to an enemy becomes model and warning. She is praised for sacrifice, yet pitied for loss. Her story teaches future girls that their bodies may not be theirs to command. The cycle repeats, sanctified by precedent. At times, the long-term effect is cultural fusion. A foreign princess brings her language, her saints, her festivals into her new home. Over decades, these customs blend with local ones, reshaping traditions. Children of such unions grow up bilingual, carrying songs and prayers from two lands. What began as a reluctant treaty bride may, generations later, seed a shared identity that outlives the politics of the day. The sorrow of one woman thus evolves into the heritage of a people. Still, history proves that peace secured by marriage is fragile. The grandchildren of these unions often wage wars to claim what their grandparents tried to unify. Treaties signed with kisses unravel in blood. You recall how the union of England and France through a princess's hand eventually led to the 100 Years' War, or how Habsburg marriages, meant to unite humans, spawned disputes that dragged Europe into centuries of conflict. The daughters paid with their lives, yet their children paid with their swords. Long-term consequences also stretch across continents. Marriages link not just kingdoms but empires. A daughter sent east may carry her blood into Byzantium, shaping its emperors. A bride sent west may tie Spain to the New World. Lineages ripple outward until entire oceans feel the echo of one treaty. You see how history bends around these unions, how maps redrawn in ink led to maps redrawn in conquest. But the deepest consequence lies in memory. For every daughter exalted as peacemaker, dozens vanish unnamed. Their sacrifices fade, their voices silenced, their presence reduced to footnotes. They become the forgotten scaffolding of empires, invisible yet essential. Without them, borders would be different, crowns worn by others. Yet they rarely receive statues, poems, or chronicles of their own. Their legacy is hidden in the victories and tragedies of others. The princess herself often lives long enough to see the consequences unfold. She watches her children grow, her homeland change, her treaty unravel or endure. She becomes historian of her own sorrow, noting how choices made in her youth ripple through decades. Sometimes she feels pride, seeing peace hold, seeing prosperity bloom. Other times she feels despair, watching war return, her sacrifice wasted. Her life becomes both witness and warning. Her descendants carry her legacy in ways they may never recognize. A grandson claims 2 crowns because of her blood. A granddaughter inherits a convent built in her honor. Generations later, bards sing of battles her marriage made possible. She is forgotten as person, remembered only as ancestor, yet in that forgetting, she still shapes destiny, her unseen hand steering thrones and armies. The long-term consequences also reveal hypocrisy. Kings boast of peace achieved by their daughters, yet they seldom endure the cost themselves. They live to enjoy the stability, while their daughters bear the sorrow. The cycle continues because it benefits men in crowns, while costing women their freedom. History, in its irony, praises the outcomes while erasing the sacrifice. And yet, without these unions, the world would be unrecognizable. Borders, languages, religions, and cultures all bear their imprint. The consequence of one princess riding across a border is not confined to her lifetime, but unfolds across centuries. Wars are delayed, dynasties rise, cultures mingle, and entire peoples change course because of her journey. She becomes history's quiet architect, her name fading even as her influence remains carved into the world. So you sit with the chroniclers, watching ink dry on parchment, and you realize the long-term consequences of sold daughters are not measured in single lives. They are measured in nations, in generations, in the maps we know today. Every border whispers of their footsteps. Every crown carries their tears. The treaties may falter, the marriages may crumble, but the daughters' legacies endure, unseen yet unshakable, threaded through history like invisible veins of gold. History's memory does not always honor these daughters fairly. You sit in the silence of an archive, candlelight flickering across parchment, and see how the scribes recorded them. Some are mentioned only once, their names reduced to a single line. She was married to secure peace. Others are remembered with scorn, blamed for betrayals they never chose, their reputations poisoned by wars that came long after their vows. Yet a few are exalted, cast as saints or heroines, praised as peacemakers who sacrificed willingly. The truth lies somewhere between these extremes, but history rarely allows them the dignity of complexity. Chronicles written by men tend to flatten their stories. A princess becomes little more than a tool of policy, her character irrelevant beyond beauty or obedience. Chroniclers prefer to focus on the fathers who arranged the treaties, the husbands who claimed the prize, the heirs who carried the bloodline. The daughter herself vanishes into the margins, her life seen as useful only in relation to others. You trace the ink with your finger and feel the absence more keenly than the words themselves. Some, however, break through obscurity. A daughter who resisted, who wielded influence in her husband's court, who wrote letters with conviction, she sometimes forces the scribes to take notice. These women are remembered not only as pawns, but as players. Their legacy complicates the narrative, reminding future readers that even within cages, some found ways to shape their world. Yet these exceptions are rare, and their survival in records is often more luck than justice. Legends, too, warp the truth. Ballads may transform a frightened girl into a willing martyr, her tears erased, her doubts silenced. Villagers sing of her as dove of peace, not knowing she wept herself to sleep in cold chambers. Over generations, the legend eclipses the life. She is remembered not for who she was, but for who people wanted her to be. In this way, even memory becomes another form of captivity. Still, the daughter's influence is undeniable. The kingdoms they bound, the heirs they bore, the cultures they blended, all remain visible centuries later. Whether praised or forgotten, their presence shaped the world more profoundly than the chroniclers admitted. Every crown that sat upon a descendant's head carried her blood. Every border carved by dynastic claim traced back to her journey. Her life, erased in stories, persisted in reality. You sense the cruel paradox. Remembered too little, yet felt too much. Their names fade, but their consequences endure. They become ghosts walking through history, unseen but powerful, whispering in every treaty, every war, every birth of kings. The silence surrounding them is not absence, but testimony to how thoroughly they were consumed by duty. Some modern minds might ask whether they were victims or heroines. The answer is not simple. They were both, often at once. Victims of fathers who traded them, of husbands who controlled them, of courts that judged them, yet heroines too. For they endured, they carried kingdoms on their shoulders, they bore the weight of peace. To survive in such circumstances was itself a form of victory. To continue, to endure, to keep breathing when freedom was denied, that was their quiet defiance. Imagine one of these daughters in her final years, grey-haired, her children grown, her treaty long overshadowed by new conflicts. She sits in her chamber, looking back over decades. She remembers the day of her departure, the weight of jewels on her gown, the cheers of crowds she did not feel. She remembers the journey, the fear, the nights alone in foreign chambers. She remembers the children she bore, some lost in infancy, some grown to inherit thrones. She wonders if her sacrifice mattered. She wonders if peace was truly bought by her tears, or if men simply found new excuses for war. Perhaps she takes solace in her descendants, in grandchildren who carry her eyes, her laugh, even if they never knew her story. Perhaps she clings to the small mercies she found, a kind maid, a moment of laughter, a letter from her mother. History, when told honestly, must admit this cruelty. Behind every treaty signed with a marriage lay a girl silenced, her freedom extinguished. Behind every map redrawn with dynastic claims lay a journey taken in sorrow. Behind every hymn praising peace lay a weeping daughter who could not say no. To forget this is to lie about the past. To remember it is to give them back a fragment of their stolen dignity. And so, as the narrative of this tale reaches its close, you imagine whispering to these long-vanished women. You tell them their lives were not in vain, even if history forgot them. You tell them that survival itself was a kind of triumph, that their endurance shaped the world more than their fathers ever knew. You tell them they are remembered now, not as pawns, but as human beings whose tears mattered. The story quiets here, the pace softening, the words stretching like evening shadows. You linger in the halls of memory, where banners fade and candles burn low. You let the clamour of politics fade, leaving only the whisper of lives lived beneath it. The daughters rest at last, not as nameless treaties, but as voices recovered in the hush of history. And with that image, the story eases into silence. The drums of war, the chants of priests, the whispers of courtiers, all fade. What remains is calm, the calm of memory, of rest, of release. The daughters who were sold to enemies are not forgotten here. They breathe again in the telling, their endurance honoured, their pain acknowledged, their humanity restored. So drift now with that thought. Let it settle like quiet snow. History is full of noise, but in its stillness, you can hear them. Their voices rise not in protest but in the soft cadence of survival, echoing across centuries. You are not alone with them. They walk beside you in the hush of night, reminding you that every life, even bound by chains, leaves a mark. Sleep now, carrying their story with you. Sleep knowing their sacrifices shaped the world, and their whispers still linger in its stones.